let me look at it, I'll like.
Meeting called to order on January 2019, 2020 at 7 p.m. We'll go ahead and move into roll call. Senator Advet. Olagard. Bender. Blair. Khan. Crabb. Coulson. Dollinger. Fritz. Green. Gonzalez. Hanyang. Heasley. Johnson. Class. Klein. Klein. Lipford. Ludwig. Mass. Meredith. Mitchell. Orger. Rice. Rinchi. Rolling. Samanu. Schrader. Searles. Stanley. Samuel. Tonet. Zastro. Close call. We'll go ahead and move into Pledge of Allegiance, led by Speaker Culbertson. Moving on, for programs for tonight, we do have two programs. First of all, we'll start with SciRide, and I believe we have the director herself. Congratulations.
Hello. First, good evening. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, my name's Barb Neal, so I have just recently been appointed transit director at SciRide. And I'm kind of excited to be here tonight to tell you more about SciRide and the partnership we have with you, the students, and the university. And you guys have really played a huge role in our success. But as the new director, really what I'm hoping that I can take away from this is making sure that SciRide's kind of has open lines of communication with you so you can tell us the things you need and the things that are important to you. So I'm hoping to go through a quick presentation about SciRide and the history of SciRide, and then maybe, if there's time, allow you to ask me a few questions or, you know, kind of tell me what you're seeing or what your constituents are seeing or what you'd like to see in SciRide. So I guess to make you switch, I go like that. So SciRide really began in 1976, and it started as a door-to-door service. We had 6 vehicles and 20 employees, and we carried 86,000 riders a year. At that time, it was a department of the city. So then, I'm gonna get good at this. So then in 1981, what happened is the university and the city got together and they thought, we need to provide transit, but we might be able to provide it better if we worked collaboratively and cooperatively. So they created SciRide as you guys know it now. When they did this, they created how SciRide would be funded. So SciRide is kind of uniquely funded. It's funded, you don't have to go that far yet, but it's funded 3 ways. So it's funded by the students, so by you guys with your fees, and it's also funded by the City of Ames through property taxes, and it's funded by ISU administration through their budgeting process. And when they set this up, they also set up what's called the Student Government Trust Fund, and that's designed to smooth out fluctuations in enrollment so that there's always enough revenues there for SciRide. They created a board of trustees at the same time, and we currently SIRIDE. So they set our policies and procedures. There's 6-member board. We have 2 permanent members, so city manager Steve Schenker, and then I never remember Pam Kane's name or actual title, so interim vice president of finance maybe, but Pam Kane. And then we have 4 non-permanent members that serve 1- and 2-year terms. So 2 of them are with the city, 1 is an appointee of the city, and 1 is on city council. And then you have 2 student representatives that are always on the board. So you have Jacob, who is on our board, and then you also have Juan, who's on our board, and he's currently the president of SIRIDE, the transit board. So another kind of pivotal point in SIRIDE history was in 2001. So this is when SIRIDE became fare-free to ISU students. And this was a grant by just showing their red ISU card. So the students kind of came up with this referendum. There was one student in particular who really drove this, and that was Jennifer Larson. And she at the time was the GSB appointee for SIRIDE and also was the transit board president at SIRIDE. That referendum passed March 7th, 2001. 85 vehicles, about 180 employees, and about 30% of them are ISU students. And we carry about 6.1 million passengers a year. I forgot to put on this slide Moonlight Express. So we also do a Moonlight Express service that some of you may have taken. And it's a combination of a fixed route service as well as a door-to-door service that runs Friday and Saturday nights when ISU is in session from 10:30 to 2:30 in the morning. I think from the creation of SIRIDE from 1981 to the decision to go fare-free in 2001 and even to today, students have really always played really an intricate role in SIRIDE, and it's really been your vision and your input that has shaped us into the organization that we are today. So I want to share a fact with you. So on this next slide, I wanted to show, so I forgot part of the word in the slide here, but so the American Public Transit Association publishes every year a fact book. So this is from the 2019 fact book, and they look at every transit system in the United States, and they rank you in rank order. And SIRIDE is 3rd in the nation in rides per capita. So it's New York, San Francisco, Ames, Iowa. And I think that's something that every single person in this room should be proud of. I think this probably has the biggest statement about what this partnership has done, kind of that shared commitment to work together. Earlier I mentioned that SIRIDE is funded uniquely 3 ways. So the next slide here has our revenues for this year, and I just wanted to point out kind of how it works. So the student government gives us about you guys give us about 46% of our funding. The city of Ames gives us 16% through property taxes, and then Iowa State administration gives us about 7%. So if you combine the students and the university, over 50% of our revenues come from the university in some way or another. And I also want to tell you, I think you can see the value of SIRIDE every day, but I think the next chart will show you a little bit about why it's really important that SIRIDE continue to have high ridership levels. So SIRIDE carries about 6.1 million passengers. Each student on SIRIDE generates about 164 rides. And if you just want to click to the next one, Jacob. So 93% of our riders are students, so it kind of starts at the ridership, and what happens here is because we have such high ridership, SIRIDE gets additional federal and state revenues, so we get about $1.5 million a year because we outperform transit agencies with populations over 200,000. That outperformance allows us to have more grant opportunities, which buys capital. So you can get buses, bus stop amenities, technology. That also additional federal and state money can provide service levels, so we can also continue to give you service. So last year we added almost $200,000 worth of additional services from the SIRIDE 2.0 where we saw there were some gaps. And all of that, so the high ridership, federal money, grants, service, allows for personal choice. And really that allows you to decide, do you want to take SIRIDE from your house today? Do you want to ride it from Iowa State Center? Do you want to have a car on campus at all? It allows you to make green, sustainable decisions. So I just wanted you to kind of see that circular model that happens here with SIRIDE. And then in order to continue to be successful, SIRIDE really needs to be able to adapt and change quicker than what we're doing right now. We need to be more agile and able to change our services to match the needs of you guys and the needs of the community. So we need better data, and we're really looking to technology to help us be able to be more efficient and respond quicker. So I want to go through just a couple technology things we've done and a couple that are on the horizon. So the AVL, so the automatic vehicle locating, most of you know we did replace that this year. So we went from NextBus to Synchromatics. So that's a new change, and we're working with MyState to continue for reliability. So we're working through some issues there, and we just recently did this transition, but they've been really good to work with us. And then the AVA, so automatic voice enunciating. So if you've ridden the bus, it announces certain stops inside and out, tells you what route, what stop you're at. And I think the important part about that is that was a request from the Office of Student of Accessibilities that asked for this service. And so we were able to find a grant and get some additional grant money so that we could provide that to those students and allow them a more accessibility to the system. And then one that's on the horizon is APCs, automatic passenger counters. So the goal at SkyRide is to get all articulated buses on the 23 Orange route to help with overcrowding, because we know it's crowded there, right? But we also want to get APCs, automatic passenger counters, that would allow people to board through all doors. So you could board and exit through all doors. So we're working on that technology as well. That would speed up service delivery because we wouldn't have to dwell as much, and it would also, reduce overcrowding with the articulated buses. So I mentioned a little bit about additional grant opportunities. So I want to tell you some of the grants, the capital that's coming this year. So SkyRide was really fortunate to get some really good grants this year. We're going to get about $5.2 million in grant funding this year. So we will be getting 3 new 40-foot buses. Those will replace 3 old 40-foot buses, actually 1993 buses. I was thinking, might be older than some of you in this room. So. And we're getting a 60-foot bus, so we will take a 40-foot bus and upgrade to that articulated that I talked about, so we can, the goal of being all articulated is on the Orange route. And then the grant that we're really excited about is we were awarded a low-no grant, so we will get 2 battery electric buses in our fleet and the infrastructure. Those buses will replace 2 diesel buses, so they're projected to reduce carbon emissions by 122,000 pounds annually. 2 other things, we're getting 2 new support vehicles, which are used for operations to help with the system, and those 2 vehicles will be hybrid vehicles, and we're looking to going all electric on those vehicles if we can. So that's really all I have, so thank you. I didn't know if there was time, but if you want, I'd be happy to answer some questions or hear what you guys have to say. I did bring Rich Lenners with me. He's the Assistant Director of Fleet and Facilities, so I'm more curious about what things are important to you and what you'd like to see from SkyRide.
Questions for us? Senator Searles.
Hi, all right. Thanks for coming.
I have to figure out where is this coming from.
Um,
I feel like I'm on the impeachment trial or something.
I will try not to make you feel like
Okay.
that. However, no.
Yeah, here's my issues.
One, super pumped to see all the green initiatives in there and the upgrades to SkyRide. This might be a stupid question, so senators, please don't judge me. Are there any, I don't know if you'd call them like dynamic route plans, so with the inclement weather we've been having, I'm sure there's an increased ridership in the winter kind of just annually. And I'm sure maybe the routes change a little bit or there's extra buses running.
Buses, yep.
But when it's like sleeting or heavy precipitation on a day that it's like unexpected surge in ridership, are there dynamic routes that, like, does it change depending on the weather if there's an increase in ridership? Because I know people complain about missing the bus all the time when they're really not at the bus stop, and they're like, "Oh, it just pulled away." But I have
I think I heard you just say that.
Yeah. Who's being impeached now?
Yeah. Didn't you say that? Sorry, I left you.
And I've been there. I've done that too, where I'm like, it didn't stop, but it definitely was because I was late. But in increased ridership, I've also seen groups of, I think I counted the other day, it was 19 people got turned away from a full bus.
Oh.
And then all had to walk to class, which is just because of weather, and that was increased ridership. So are there dynamic routes that could change like that?
So how it should work, 19 people shouldn't have to walk to class. I mean, how it should work is that we have a set number of buses out there, but then when ridership, we expect ridership to be bad, or, you know, we monitor the loads. We actually monitor loads every day, hand calculate how many people are out there. Then what should happen is if that driver left that many people at the bus, they should have called, and we can come out and pick up those people, which is typically what happens. So during bad weather, now it depends. When it gets really bad, students don't go to class as much, so we can pull buses off the orange route and have them help us in other spots, because definitely commuters won't drive in, you know, from other areas. So that shouldn't happen. You know, I would encourage you, if that is happening, to call us, because there's always opportunities to do better, right? You know, and so we could look into that. One of the things, so SciRide 2.0 was the first system redesign in SciRide history, and I'll be the first to admit, I don't think we got it right. I don't think we did everything right. I think we made some operational changes that we need to look at. So I've been talking with the drivers, and I think one of those is looking at runners too, though, people, what we call runners, people running for the bus. I don't think we should have to wait if you're 5 blocks away and just, you know, tootling along. But when you're sprinting to the bus, I think we should wait. And I think most people on the bus don't really mind waiting. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but my opinion is we've all had to run for the bus, right? So if we have to wait for one person, we're probably okay with that, as long as it's not indefinitely. So that's one change we're making. And then the other change we're making is we got rid of what we call guaranteed transfers on campus. So I don't know how many of you live clear out west on Red and Lilac and Purple. So we used to not, until we just started this January 13th, is we used to not wait at State Gym, Beyer Hall for you. So now if you do ride the red route, we will wait for the green route to pick you up so that you can get into Central Campus, so you don't just have to necessarily walk from Upper or Lower Friley. And that's stuff we've heard from you guys, that honestly, we can't do everything, obviously. We have financial constraints, but we really do want to try to really hear what you have to say and do the best we can to deliver what you'd want. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and then my next question, more serious tone. Is there any way we can punish students who don't go all the way to the back of the bus when the bus driver says, please move to the back of the bus?
Yeah, I don't know. You tell me.
I yield. Thank you.
We even say it on the announcements now, on Orange Route.
Senator Ludwig.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today.
Of
I love all
course.
the information you shared with us. Always got Vice Speaker Schrader over here bugging us about all the cool things SciRide is doing, so it's nice to hear from you. I was just curious what SciRide's kind of strategy is in the coming years with declining enrollment, how they're going to try and maintain services, or if there are planned cuts.
Yeah, I didn't get too much into that, just 'cause I didn't know the level that you guys want to hear here. But I think we really do need to look to technology. We have the ability with this new AVL system to get what's called stop-level data, so we could actually figure out how many people are getting on at every stop. So I think that's going to allow us to respond quicker. I think we will have to strategically look at cutting back our services, how it looks right, because as ISU enrollment has increased, so has SciRide's ridership, and we've given you more service, right? As enrollment is declining, so is our ridership, and I think we have to right size. But the reason I wanted to show that circle is I think it's important that we right size thoughtfully, because I don't want to risk $1.5 million, because what I can do now is every dollar you give me, I can make it more money. I can make it $1.30, $1.50, some grant opportunities, I can make it $3, you know? So what I don't want to do is cut services to the point where your dollar only buys $1, which makes SciRide look very different. If I had the answer to that, though, I wouldn't be standing here, probably. I would be somewhere much nicer, you know? So, but I'm gonna look to you guys to give us information on that, and that's why, I mean, I would like to talk about Moonlight at some point, because Moonlight ridership is declining a lot. So the question is it not a service that's necessary? Is there another way we could be giving you guys service in this area so we could still meet your needs, things like that? I think that's the kind of conversations we're gonna have to have. And I'll look to Juan and Jacob to be kind of your voice and let us know. But that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, awesome, yeah, because SciRide's an awesome service, and I think, you know, we're pretty privileged here at Iowa State to have such an awesome transit service, so I'd hate to see it kind of, I guess, pull back too much.
I know, that's, yeah,
So, yeah, thank you.
yeah.
I yield.
Senator Zastro.
I don't have any questions. I'd just like to say I lived at Towers last year, and I don't know what I would have done without SciRide.
Thank you.
It's a really great service. 25 gold, yeah. Oh yeah, 25 gold's a great one. I think I had something else. I don't know. I yield. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Green.
Hi, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
My question, I missed, I guess, what the ratio was for student employees to regular employees.
About 30%.
Okay, and then is the ratio for that something that y'all shoot for, or does it just happen that, okay, yeah. That was
It does just happen. So Cyride has about 180 employees, probably 150 of those are drivers. Only 24 of them are full-time. All the rest are part-time employees. So anybody who wants to learn how to drive Cyride, you just need to fill out an application. We would love to have you. So that ratio tends to go up and down. I only know that because I'm having to fill out all the work study forms for all of you. So that's how I know. But it's been higher, and it's ultimately been lower too. But it usually kind of lands about 30%. It's not a goal, but I always want us to employ students because I think it's important. Since you guys give us that amount of money, I think it's important that we also employ you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Vet.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming out. That was one of the most engaging and interesting presentations I've seen in a long, long while.
Thanks.
Secondly, I had a question about the AVL systems. So, do you know when they're going to be rolled out? And so, how do they work? Are they going to be working off of facial recognition, maybe motion sensors? Could you?
The APCs, you mean?
Like,
The passenger counters?
Yep.
The passenger counters currently actually, and Rich can probably speak to this better than me, but they're actually in some of the articulated buses. So if you look above the doors, there should be a black box above it, and it does so it points down. The issue we've had with this is we have double wide doors, and the intent is to offload quicker, right? So people can exit the bus quicker. The problem is the APCs have a hard time counting people double in backpacks and stuff. So we're looking at making slightly smaller doors so that maybe we can get the APCs to work better so that we can get people on and off quicker. That's a balance, but that's, hopefully I answered your question. If not, I'll get Rich to do it.
Yeah, we're not gonna get to the level of facial recognition.
No, yeah.
sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Senator Class.
Yeah, so you talked about Moonlight and being on the constituency for off-campus residents. We kind of have talked about it a little bit. Do you know how much ridership declined when like Uber and Lyft kind of started, or did it decline as enrollment declined a little more?
That's a great question. So I think it's been a combination of all those things. I think off-campus housing, some of those places have their own security systems, they have their own areas, things like that. But I do think Uber and Lyft are easy, right? They're there when you need them. The advantage Cyride has is we're free, right? So I don't know the answer to that. I did just look at Moonlight numbers to try to figure out, is there a time where it's trending off? Like maybe we could run till 1 o'clock in the morning, and then could we stop? Could people, then get home? And I'll tell you, I looked at that data, and it's pretty consistent from 10 to, I looked at hour increments, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. It doesn't really start trailing off until about 2 o'clock. So I don't know that there's a great gap there. I did have a really good slogan if we ended it. I was going to say, end it at midnight and say, nothing good happens after midnight. Because that was what Johnny Orr used to say all the time, and your parents said that, so.
Yeah, and then like a second question is how, as student government, like obviously I think Moonlight's a great idea. I can personally say I haven't used, well, I used it freshman year, I guess, when I lived in the dorms. But how could we better advertise it, or like, are you looking for us to advertise it, or just like kind of word of mouth stuff, things like that?
We've always, I think any way we could cooperatively work together. I mean, we're running this service for you guys. To me, you should be using it. You should be being able to have discretionary trips and get home safely. If it's not serving the need you need right now, that's fine. But I do think the need's probably out there. We haven't traditionally advertised it because it's a balance.
Right.
While I've just became the director, I've been at Cyride for quite a while, and when we did used to advertise it, when we would go to the bars on Welch and advertise and stuff like that, what happened is we got a lot of pushback that we were encouraging people to drink. which I don't believe is accurate. I mean, I think people are gonna drink regardless, and we're just telling you a safe way to get home. But, you know, so it's a balance, like, how do you say it's out there so that people know and can be safe, right? And then you're not encouraging people to go out and drink. So any ideas you have, I mean, you can tell Jacob, you can tell Juan, you can email me. I'd be happy to, you know, work with this and figure out the best way to deliver that service, so more people use it.
Yeah, that's an interesting pushback.
Yeah.
Didn't think of that one. But yeah, thank you very much just for Cyride in general, and I yield.
Senator Heasley.
May I address the speaker?
Yes, you may.
Hi.
Hi.
I also wanted to talk about the Moonlight Express. The main thing that I've heard from constituents is they feel like it's unreliable. Like I've personally seen students like waiting for the bus to come, and then like I'll walk up to them and be like, "Oh, I wouldn't be waiting for this if I were you. It's gonna take like another 30 minutes." I'm like, "I don't know. It says it's gonna be here right now." It's like, "Yeah, it said that like 10 minutes ago." So I don't know if that's a problem with like the MyState app or
Okay.
whether it's just the actual Cyride, but I don't know. I really love the Moonlight Express, and whenever I get the chance to use it, I will. So
Well, I think that's great feedback. I don't obviously have an answer for that standing up here, but it's certainly something we can look into. We can pull all that data and figure out if the buses are late, you know, what's happening. And the MyState app is, this is no fault of MyState. They've been great to work with. But as we switch to a different provider, it's pulling different data. So we're trying to, I know it's not always been the most reliable, but they've been really great trying to work with us and trying to get it as good as possible. We actually have our own app, the MyRide app, but I think MyState works best for you guys,
Well,
so.
I suspect might be happening there is it's not learning, you know, because that's a unique route that just happens.
Right, so, yeah, so one of the things is it gets smarter as it goes, right? So here's a time point, and then it tries to calculate when the interim time points will be. So it's possible that it's not calculating it enough because it's only happening twice a week, right? But yeah, that would be interesting to know, especially since the fixed route part of it, they run every 20 minutes. And then the door-to-door part is on demand. So you call, we pick you up like an Uber or a Lyft, so that part should be working fine. It would just be the fixed route, and they run every 20 minutes, so really, it shouldn't be a problem, but that doesn't mean it's not. But I appreciate the comment, because we don't hear them, we can't fix them.
right. So maybe a potential solution, would you be able to, like at different stops, like post the times that you think the bus should be there, or like the times that it's planning to be there? And that way it would give students a better idea of like, well, the bus should be here around 2:20, so like
Okay.
I'll get there like, I don't know, 2:10 or something, so like give it a little leeway. But I don't know, just a thought. that
Are
came
the
to me.
areas you're talking, like, would that be like in the Welch Avenue area?
Yeah, more
Okay.
than likely.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's a simple, relatively easy solution, so. As
Perfect.
long as Rich wrote it down, I don't forget.
Perfect, thank you. I yield.
Senator Blair.
Can I address
Go ahead.
just about the Moonlight again. I don't want to be a dead horse, but does it lose money? Like, what's the financial, is it like a really huge cost?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to look at the under that rock, no. So we don't really look at it to that level of data. I mean, I'm going to guess right now, based on the ridership, it is losing money. The nice thing about Moonlight is, again, like I said, I've been at Cyride for a while, so Moonlight used to be fully funded by the students. The students bought all of Moonlight. Ridership declined. It wasn't called Moonlight at the time. Ridership declined, and we actually quit running Moonlight for a semester, and the students were so upset that they didn't have Moonlight to get around that we re-brought it back and rebranded it as Moonlight Express. And so now it's split between all three funding parties. So it probably is losing money at this point because ridership is down, but I can't honestly answer that question up here. I don't know. I mean, I would answer it. I just don't have the data to support it.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, not everyone who rides Moonlight's drunk, of course.
Right.
But if it even keeps some people off the road
Safe.
and keeping people safe, as long as it's not like collapsing Cyride,
Right.
I feel like it has like a value.
I think that, yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think that's important, you know. You can't measure what you prevented,
Yeah.
right?
Do you yield? Senator Gonzalez.
Hi, Just a quick question. I was wondering if you know about the cleanliness of the side rides. I know there's like a lot of sickness going around. I'm kind of worried about germs. So I don't know if you knew that
Yeah.
or like how often
Do you
they
want
get
to talk
cleaned.
about how they clean the buses? We have a good cleaning program, so.
Yeah, so, for example, on Moonlight, if there is an unfortunate incident on Moonlight, it gets pulled off of service right away and brought back to be cleaned. So part of the things we wrestle is we do a lot of sustainable things behind the scenes as well. So one of the things we want to do is help protect what we call our service workers, the formal names lane workers, protect them from the harmful effects of harsh cleaners. So anyway, to answer your question is we actually use I believe it's a hydrogen peroxide-based cleaner to disinfect the buses. So, and we're also starting to explore like the black lights they're using in hospitals, although they have to be set on the bus and have to run for so long before the bus is completely disinfected. But for right now, we're wiping them down, and you know, cleanliness is one of our internal core values. We like to keep those buses clean inside and out. So, and like Barb's been asking for, we want feedback on that immediately if you find a dirty bus, because what happens is that when we put a clean, attractive bus out, more people like to ride it, and they also vandalize it less. So anyway, I'm getting way off track and probably talking too much, but we take a great deal of pride in keeping these vehicles clean for you. So, and germ-free, so we don't transmit diseases. So.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I yield.
Vice Speaker Schrader. Senator Stanley.
Good evening. I'd like to inquire more about when you mentioned experience and the predictive system. Could you explain a little more what you mean by that?
So now, I'm not the technology guru, but as I understand it, Synchromatics, it learns as it's going. So not every stop in SciRide is a time point, isn't a spot, so we have what are called time points. So there's a designated time where a bus shouldn't leave before this time, and a designated spot here, and there might be 5 stops along the way. So it's predicting when you hit this spot, when it's gonna hit these spots. Does that make sense?
Sure. What are the factors that it uses to make those predictions? Is it like human, like the movement of riders, or is it the movement of the tendencies of the drivers themselves?
Do you know the answer to that? I don't. And this is way outside of my wheelhouse. I'd be happy to get you the information. If you want to give Jacob your stuff, I'd be happy to get the people who do the technology for us to get you that, but this is outside of my area of expertise.
Sure. I'm asking because I had like an idea for how you could
Perfect.
maybe get some more of that experience. I was thinking if you modeled some of the Moonlight Express routes and ran simulations of them, you know, a few hundred or 1,000 times maybe, you could sort of artificially manufacture that experience that the predictive system is lacking perhaps. And so you'd be in a, probably not perfect, but you'd be in a better place than without any kind of information at all.
No, that's great. I mean, again, you guys are, this is a wealth of knowledge here at this university, so I can't claim to know it all. But yeah, I mean, if you want to exchange information, give it to me, give it to Jacob. I'd be happy to, maybe there's some way to coordinate better services.
Sure, that'd be wonderful. I yield.
Vice Speaker Schrader.
Yeah, so thanks for coming, Barb
Yes.
and Rich. I just want to say that Barb and Rich are both really awesome to work with. They take student concerns seriously. Feedback we have, and it works well. So as we kind of go into, as Senator Ludwig mentioned, kind of enrollment declines, you kind of have to start looking and weighing different things. So hopefully this gives you the background for strategic decisions. Please give feedback to myself, or even, I'm sure
Me.
Barb would love to have it, or Juan, as to what SciRide looks like. What are maybe areas that you think could be reduced or expanded? If you have areas that you think should be reduced, I'd be interested to hear. But so as we try to make SciRide more efficient, even as we're maybe not running as many buses out, but I'm happy to take your feedback, any feedback you have with this, and share it with Barb, or you can contact Barb directly. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Moving on, we have Mike Norton from University Council.
Good evening. Glad to be with you tonight. We wanted to just let you know that the new chalking policy has been posted for public comment on the policy webpage. So as you recall, in November, there was an interim chalking policy that was introduced. After that, basically, we were invited to work with a committee and get feedback about that interim policy. So we got feedback from campus, we got feedback from state legislators, we got feedback from the Board of Regents. And out of that feedback, we developed the chalking policy that's now posted on the website. The main, it's different than the interim policy. The interim policy basically disallowed chalking except for student organizations. And that was really based on the chalking policy that was in effect at the University of Iowa. Since that time, we have developed a new policy which allows chalking for everyone in all parts of campus except for a few designated areas where chalking will no longer be allowed of any kind. And those designated areas, as you'll see in the policy, and there's also a map that shows you, but generally speaking, the primary area where chalking is no longer allowed will be what's called the historic central campus area, which is essentially the quad. So the area between Beardshear and Curtis, and between here and Osborne, I guess that is. So, and then Memorial Union has never had allowed chalking. That still will be a place where chalking is not allowed. And then the state law indicates some areas where it's not a public forum, so where expression is not allowed, and that's the health center, the vet med, and areas where the public come for sporting events and so forth, so Hilton and Jack Trice, that's part of state law. So you can see the map there. The yellow area, that's the central quad area. Chalking will no longer be allowed there. Everywhere else, chalking will be allowed without limitation. The little highlights, there's like Teelan Health Center, the Memorial Union, some athletics facilities. And then I guess the other two areas that are significant are on the sides of Beardshear, the Anderson Sculpture Garden, chalking won't be allowed there, and the Carver Plaza, which is on the other side of Beardshear, chalking won't be allowed there either. The area in front of the library, which has been kind of traditionally the place where a lot of chalking has occurred, that is an area that will be open for chalking as well. So the process is the public comment period will be open for a week. It opened today. It'll be open until the 5th. And then once we incorporate comments from individuals, then the policy will become active after that time. There'll be a date certain that it becomes active. Until that time, the interim chalking policy is still in place until it's officially adopted. I will say also the Board of Regents, and part of the feedback that we got from the Board of Regents was that they were going to adopt a uniform chalking policy for all Regent institutions. This chalking policy, I believe, will be based on what I've been told by them, is consistent with what they will require at all Regent universities. So, for example, the University of Iowa's chalking policy will have to change as well. They do have some limitations on area where chalking is not allowed, but overall chalking is only allowed for, as our interim policy is for student orgs. So they're going to have to open their chalking to all individuals, even though they'll be able to maintain kind of those limited areas where they have. So questions?
Questions for Mike Nolan. Senator Easley.
May I address
Go
the
ahead.
speaker? Yeah, so I was wondering how you came up with this central quad area for the not allowing chalking for your policy?
Yeah, so it's really about the historic aesthetic value of that area of campus. And so, you know, that area of campus is one of three areas, or three campus quad areas that are registered as a historic area. Our quad, I think Harvard's quad, and there's one other quad area, can't remember what college it is, but there's only 3 in the country that are recognized as a historic quad area. That part of campus has been recognized as, a beautiful part of campus, and so the thought on that was just to preserve the aesthetic value of that part of campus is important. It's a part where, people make their first impression about Iowa State oftentimes as they come on tours and as they come on campus. And so it's important, I think, or we think, the aesthetic value of that area of campus is critical.
All right, cool, thank you. I yield.
Senator Han Young.
Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
Thank you for coming in. I know that this is something that will be talked about by every single student, not just members of student government. So with the fact that we'll be opening comments to this general student body here in the next coming week, how do you plan to reach out to students first and let them know about these changes, and just to maximize that conversation before the draft comes into?
Yeah. So. There will be an article in the Daily where President Winterstein and I are being interviewed for the Daily tomorrow morning, so there'll be an article in the Daily. It's also will be in Inside Iowa State tomorrow, so there'll be feedback there. It's on the policy webpage. I don't know how often you go there, but at least it's accessible there as well. And then hopefully we're counting on you as well to spread the word also and get the word out also. So.
All right, thank you. I yield.
Senator Blair.
Hi, so I was at the PLAC meeting yesterday when these rules were approved. I just wanted to make sure I'm on the record as very publicly very much opposing these rules. I think they simultaneously limit free speech and expression and do nothing to address the actual issues that were occurring last fall. I raised my concerns about the geographic areas and what we can do about the campus climate, both of which were not taken into consideration. I even asked, do you anticipate, even though this geographic area changing? I was told no. I know there is a public, comment period. From my perspective, it seems like it's not really a public comment period if there's no intention of possibly even making a change. So I very strongly do not support this. If I could vote on it, I would definitely voting no. And I think we should all send comments opposing this policy. Thank you. I yield.
So just to answer that briefly, I certainly didn't mean to convey what you're saying, and so I apologize if I didn't speak clearly on it. I think what I intended to convey, and maybe didn't do very artfully, is that the policy itself is going to be dictated to us pretty much by the Board of Regents. So the part that can change and can be influenced by public comment is the designated areas where speech where chalking will or will not be allowed. So while I wouldn't expect large changes in the policy in respect that some areas chalking will not be allowed and most areas chalking will be allowed, the comments are very important if you have feelings or thoughts about where those limitations occur, and there may very well be adjustments based on commentary that we receive about those areas of limitation.
Vice Speaker Strader.
Yeah, I had a student reach out to me asking to share some opinions, so I'm going to give my mic I'm going to ask Chuck to share his thoughts on it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time. My name is Chuck Klapatowskis. I'm the president of the Young Americans for Freedom Club on campus. I'm here tonight to voice some concern that myself and members had about the previous chalk bill and then the one moving forward. So I'm sure you're aware, but there was a lawsuit filed over while we were break. And as a Cyclone and a lifelong fan of the Cyclones, it was kind of sad for me to see this lawsuit on every single news media outlet around Des Moines. I'm from Dubuque. It was on every outlet there. And the one article that really got me was there was a Wall Street Journal article that made it that far, and it said, Iowa State would be wise to settle now to avoid further embarrassment. And that kind of hit hard to me. So I wanted to voice my concern. We talked about it at our club meeting. We want to make sure we represent our ideas. So going forward, I think we should be really careful here at student government of how we approach First Amendment, any amendment-related issues. I don't want to flack the man who gave me time, but one comment I thought was alarming was Vice Speaker Schrader said, if the University of Iowa hadn't gotten sued, then we wouldn't get sued yet. But look where we are now. So I think we shouldn't base off of other universities or what current law has. I think we should be the ones that lead by example. We set the policy that works for all universities and won't be illegal in manners. Senator Zastrow, you had provided some comments in that meeting, and I know you talked to council and you did an in-depth analysis, but I think even for this public comment, I think we should prolong it. We should talk to more attorneys, more law firms, because the news media and the outlets seem to think that this firm that was suing the university really has something. So I think if we're going to develop a permanent policy, we should really do a more in-depth analysis of whether it has legal precautions, because I don't think anyone in this room wants to see another lawsuit. And then my third concern was, how are we going to enforce this policy? So the one right now, I don't know if you're aware, but there's some caucus for Bernie and caucus for Yang, which personally I think that's great. That's what this university is for, and going forward, I think that's a huge opening for us. But regardless, it's not technically allowed in the current policy, but it's been up for 3 days. So if this policy was to get rid of like the swastikas and the hate that are on sidewalks, will we let them up for 3 days? So, I mean, either the university isn't enforcing it or it's not able to be enforced. So I think if we're making a permanent policy, we need to create something that allows it to be enforced and better for the community. So if you have any questions or comments, you can contact me. My information is on the directory, and I'd love to help, and I hope we can have a good plan going forward.
And so I would like to add for my, personal comments. Mr. Norton, do you view that the creation of this in any way creates a free speech zone that is outside the highlighted areas?
No, it's not. It's not. It doesn't create a free speech zone. It's not. There are cases that describe what free speech zone is, and it's not this. So no,
Yeah.
I don't believe that's correct.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I do actually believe. I think that you're correct in that legally this isn't a free speech zone. The university has allowed reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, and if you're not chalking, you can table anywhere, you can flyer anywhere, you can do whatever. You have other opportunities, but I don't like someone's ability, in which ways someone can express themselves being determined based on where they're standing on the university. And to Senator Blair's point, I think this restricts student freedom a little bit and doesn't really accomplish what I believe the goal of the initial temporary policy was to do, which was to try and, which was in response to the Students Against Racism. I understand that, if that's not the stated goal, but so I feel the goal is I don't think it accomplishes that, and I think it restricts student speech in a way. So if this is what we're going with, this is what the Board of Regents is mandating, I would like to define the historical grounds as small as we can, and that'll be the comment I'll leave. But I think that I think that should be something that we all take in mind as we give comment, as we try and give feedback, that this is restricting student speech, even if it's just a little bit, even if there's plenty of opportunities elsewhere. That should be something that we should be wary about. And then, Mr. Norton, if you wanted to respond to anything that I said or that Chuck said, I'll ask you a question if you would like to give a comment on that.
No, I mean, I think that just understand, right, the chalking policy doesn't limit anyone's ability to speak in these areas, so you're welcome, anyone is welcome to come and protest, demonstrate, speak, leaflet. The only thing you're not allowed to do is chalk. And so, we do have a absolute core value of the university is to protect the First Amendment. It's absolutely one of our core values. And so, I think that's exhibited in the policies that we're trying to make and the enforcement of those policies. So,
and I appreciate the map. I think it's helpful, especially compared to some of the other things I've seen in other universities. So keep the map of whatever end thing you
Hopefully
come
we'll
up
get
with.
better. That's just our highlighter, but we've asked FP&M to actually create a digitally generated map that might be a little more precise. So.
All right, I yield.
Senator Rinchi.
Yeah, thanks, permission to just.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks again for coming in, but there's kind of a theme of, we know that you don't have absolute power to control some of the things that we wanted to see changed with this policy. And it sounds like a lot of it's coming from the Board of Regents. So what is the most effective way for students who have the concerns to come forward to go and bring these in front of the board? Would that be through you? Is there a better channel? What are your insights there?
Well, so your student government leaders meet with the Board of Regents every month, so that's an important vehicle. You also have, there's an open comment period in the beginning or at some point in all of the board meetings, so that's an opportunity for you to express your views there. We actually have a member of our campus who sits on the Board of Regents, so a student who sits on the Board of Regents. That would be another area for you to voice your thoughts and opinions. So I would say that's probably the primary way to do that as well. You know, I think also it's just important to recognize that, you know, there's lots of forces at play here, Board of Regents, state legislature, campus, you know, so there's lots of input being received from a bunch of areas, and yours is important as well. So absolutely use the opportunity to voice those opinions.
No, I appreciate that, and I wanted to make sure that we got those avenues here on record, so
Yep.
that way students who are listening and also have plans can find that too. I yield, thank you.
Senator Khan.
Hello. This question was asked many times previously, however, wasn't really answered because lumped in with other questions. You addressed very much, you know, about the geographical parts of the zones of which we could and could not chalk. However, can you directly address, do you think that this policy will, like, prevent the whole reason why this started? Will it make people feel safe besides just preventing, oh, well, we can still have swastikas and hateful speech around, but just not in the parts where it's picturesque, you know?
Well, so, I mean, I know there's different views about why the policy was created, but in reality, the policy was created because of the increase in chalking that we've seen over the last couple years. And so even though it was in some respects, in timing-wise, at the same time that these other issues was going on, we've never had a chalking policy. Over the course of I've been here almost 4 years, we've had several times where we've considered whether or not to introduce a chalking policy. And so those conversations have been ongoing for several years. And so the reason that we adopted a chalking policy now was because of the just dramatic increase that we saw in chalking across campus over the last year, 2 years. So to answer that question, your other question, will this policy, you know, impact people feeling safe? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's not really designed for that purpose. So, you know, and so the First Amendment doesn't allow us to make content decisions about chalking based on the language that's used in the chalking. So there won't be the ability to erase chalking, even though you and I might be personally offended and might even think that language is repugnant and just terrible. That really can't be part of the equation when we decide how we're going to react to chalking on campus. We can make time, place, and manner restrictions, so those are restrictions where it applies to every speech. So like we have rules, you can't use open flames in demonstrations, okay? That's a time, place, and manner restriction. No matter what the content of your demonstration is, you can't use an open flame. We don't allow amplified speech in protests because that interferes with other campus activities going on. No one can do that. So that's another time, place, and manner restriction. But what we can't do is make rules based on, you know, whether we like or dislike the speech. And that will not change under this policy.
I yield.
Senator Meredith.
I definitely think it's important that everyone encourages their friends and their constituents to speak their mind on how they feel about the policy, but I think it's also important to encourage them that if they want to see something changed, to encourage them to come up with a solution or an alternative example or policy that they would like to see. Everyone that's creating these policies are human and they don't have all of the answers, so I think Schrader did a good example of that by saying, I would like to see it shrunk, the size that it's restricted on. So I think it's just important to encourage people to say the part they don't like and maybe how they would want it to be replaced. That way, when they look back and are going to potentially revise the policy, they have some ideas and can go forward rather than just thinking, okay, they don't like it, but what do they want to see instead? I yield.
Senator Klein.
Hi. So, legally speaking, would it be a time, place, and manner restriction to say put a time limit on how long chalking can remain on campus?
Yes, so you could have rules, and it will be procedure, right? So you can, if you had, you know, this sidewalk was going to be cleaned every week or every 3 days or whatever, as long as you consistently apply that, that would be an appropriate time, place, and manner restriction. So what you can't do is you know, change your procedure about removing chalk based on receiving complaints or the fact that, you know, you don't like what's being said in the chalking. But if you have a consistently applied and enforced system for removing the chalk, that's an appropriate time, place, and manner restriction.
In your opinion, would it be feasible to set up, say, even like a student task force that we could employ students on to go through and every 2 days maybe just sweep all of the sidewalks on campus to avoid, oh my gosh, to avoid.
So that's a great idea. I mean, I think we are already working with FP&M for their, you know, using their resources to have a mechanism to, and the policy does not set forth those schedules, and it probably won't be the same every part of campus, right? So chalking may remain longer in parts of campus than it does in other parts of campus, just based on resources and ability to get to those areas on a regular cleaning schedule. But I think that's a great idea and something to think about.
Thank you. I yield.
Again, Mr. Norton, thank you for coming in and explaining this. I know it's really hard to do something that not everybody's always going to agree with. I will say that there are some things I appreciate and some things I don't appreciate about this policy. I will say I really appreciate that it's written in there that chalking that violates code of conduct laws is prohibited. I think that's good to have that in there as a clear statement of what is not allowed. However, I do still feel like the abstract nature of some of what can be said, I know that there's still a lot of the time, place, manner restrictions, and we want to have viewpoint neutrality with this. We are, in some manners, back where we started at the beginning of the year. Students came in because they felt like they were being threatened by things that were written on chalking, and then also on this other side of the coin, there are students who feel like they're being mandated by the university to conform one way or the other on chalking. And what this does isn't really address that issue, but it kind of shoves it in the closet and says, this is where we want people to see the university's clean, and then the rest of it is open. So I do have a bit more just concern on it, and I know I'll probably go online and make my own personal comments as a student. But again, I'm just to everybody in this room, there have been, you know, thank you for coming in and saying that we didn't fully do our job in reaching out and seeing what students wanted. Email your constituencies, tell them about this because it's such a small window of time. we need to get as many students in and talk about this as possible because I still feel like there's room for improvement. And with that, I'll yield.
I will say too, there was strong consideration of a policy that eliminated chalking altogether. I will say that the feedback on that type of policy was not well received, particularly from our state legislature. So take that for what it's worth.
Senator Klein.
Sorry, it should be an easy question. I just don't know if it's been asked yet. Is it possible at all to extend the comment period on this policy?
There might be some small extensions. We do have some deadlines that we have to meet, and that has to do with litigation. I can't really go into a lot of detail about that, but we have to have whatever policy we are going to adopt needs to be adopted on a fairly quick schedule.
I yield.
Further questions for Mike Norman? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Moving on to open forum. Open forum is an open discussion for issues relevant to students. Anyone wishing to speak can approach the lectern.
Doesn't this look like a job for me? Standing in front of people, great people all around. So my first question is to Vice President Vasesh.
Yeah.
Where does the Board of Regents meet and when? Because I want to talk to them directly about this.
So the board meeting, it switches from, every meeting is a different campus.
Mhm.
So they switch from Iowa State campus to UNI campus to U of I campus. And the last meeting was actually at the Capitol. So we don't really know when that meeting is going to happen until we get an email saying this is the meeting and that it's it. And you can and President Graber can add on to that, but on the Board of Regents website, they actually pull up the schedule of the events of what's going to happen over those 3 days of the meeting, so y'all can go, and then that's posted, I believe, a week before the meeting.
So the next meeting is February 5th in Urbandale, Iowa, at the Board of Regents office.
Very close. That's
Yep.
lovely. I have a few extra questions. What is the smallest accepted amount of banned chalking zones that we could have? I want it to be at a minimum, personally.
Question for them.
Okay, okay. Is there a general consensus that this policy does not help anyone, or what is the consensus in here?
I mean, the Senate hasn't really, the Senate, we can't really discuss in terms of taking one issue and talk about it. It's just not within the rules of order. Or Vice Speaker Strader.
If you wanted to get Senate's opinion, it would require a resolution, and then we would vote on it. I mean, we can't take straw polls here. We can't do informal things, so.
Thank you, Mr. Schrader. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to talk about YWCA. I wanted to do this during open forum. There's a bill up, about funding YWCA. And there's this, it's a little complicated, so I wanted to talk about it during open forum instead of just during, when we have discussion about the bill later. So I'm not sure how much everyone knows. I've talked to a lot of you individually, and I talked to Finance Committee about it. But basically, YWCA is a nonprofit that is also a student organization. And so because of that, we've been funding them through annual allocations for the last, I think, forever. And this is the only nonprofit that we fund in this process. They are already an asset organization, which means they've gone through the asset recognition process. They get money from United Way during the asset process. And this has kind of just been an issue that has been sort of rolled down the hill every year. No one's really ever just moved them into the asset process. But it kind of needs to happen now in this year, because we've been asked now to start paying their payroll taxes. Basically, because of Workday, everything got way more complicated, and we're being asked to pay a lot more money out of our annuals budget than we used to for this nonprofit. And so some just kind of more stuff about why this sort of needs to happen. We don't make student clubs that come through annual allocations justify what they're doing or justify their existence, but we do for nonprofits. The evaluation process for nonprofits is primarily like impact-based. We want to see what they've done. We want to see how they're benefiting students. We don't really ask clubs to show any metrics like that. So, yeah, just kind of like a little background, I guess. You can see the bill. We're saying that we need to move 48,000 from special projects into our fiscal year 21 asset budget. So, like, long story short, basically what happened is that they were supposed to come through the asset process this year. There was miscommunication, so they didn't. But since we're not going to fund them during annual allocations, this like later in February, if we don't do something about this right now, they just won't have funding and we'll cease to be an organization entirely. So the plan is to kind of do this wonky, you know, like funnel money back into asset real quick for this year, fund them through asset this year, and then every other year they'll apply through asset, and then we can just continue to fund them like for the rest of the future that way. So we had them go through, Madison and I met with the YWCA staff. We had them open their annuals budget early, and we let them fill it out as they normally would, and then we evaluated that to try to figure out how much money we should put back into asset this year. Just some kind of highlights and some more like reasons we really need to switch this over to asset. We've been paying for their executive director's salary. We don't do that for like anyone else. There's limits for sponsored organizations. We pay office workers, student workers, $7.25 an hour. This executive director was getting significantly more than that, but it was sort of just an exception we've made for years and years because. They have 3 other program staff who just run their programs that they have. And those are student workers that we were paying $7.25 an hour. But after conversation with them and then also with Madison, even though we technically could still fund that through the annuals process, we're moving all of that also over into asset because it's their general operation money. Like this is just basically us funding their staff. And so we think that should also go through the asset process. And then again, the payroll taxes, we don't do that for any other organization. It's just kind of a wonky workday thing. Also professional development and auditor fees were things we were paying in annual allocations that really should like all go through the asset process. So yeah, that $48,000 is what we kind of went through their annuals budget and figured that we should be funding them in order for them to continue operations for this next year. There are a few things that we'll still be funding them through in annuals because they are a student organization and it's kind of just easier. For example, printing, like the normal printing costs we do for all student orgs, a mass email. And then we decided that we'll fund their one office worker through the annual process because they are a sponsored student organization. And for other sponsored organizations that we fund a worker for, it's all just like a general office worker. And so we'll do that one thing for them also through annuals. There's a few things that if you go into their budget, I'm not sure if everyone knows how to get into like all the student orgs budgets, but if you want to check it out, it's like called OFP. But in there it also asks, they asked money this year for a daily ad, an Ames Tribune ad, and then like mailing costs. We've never funded that through annuals or otherwise, so we're just also like not funding that this year. So, and then just like a quick thing, because this is just applicable to like the general discussion. So like asset budgets and annual allocations budgets are very different, like in the way we make them fill them out. So for annuals, if you look at any budget, it's all line by line, like we pay for actual items. So for example, like, you know, this worker number of hours, or like this many printing costs, or this many mass emails, stuff like that. Whereas in the asset budget, they basically give us how much each program costs to put on. It's called a unit cost. And then we fund a certain number, we contract those certain number of program unit costs, right? So we don't actually see like the breakdown of their exact budget for every program, but we get like a general year over year how much their programs cost to put on. So it's a more effective way over like a long period of time to see how their programs are doing, whether or not the programs have got more expensive. Whereas like in the annuals budget, we basically just see like, oh, they're asking for like $4,000 more for this thing, but we don't really see why. So that kind of leads me to this $48,000. It's going to be allocated to like the various programs. That's not in this bill because if you guys approve this, please just do. That would be really great. I worked with the asset admin team and everything to get this all figured out. It's been a whole process. I'll go back in and do the recommendations for which programs we fund. And then that bill, with all the other recommendations for all the other nonprofits that we did during the asset process this January, will all come back to you guys, and you can see where I put that $48,000, and you can change that then. So that's kind of how that would work. And then also, we kind of need to look at this as two problems. That was sort of a background about like why we're doing this. But then there's gonna need to be a conversation about like what next. So we are funding them probably more than we would be if we had been going through the asset process the entire time. They kind of have 4 main programs. Really only 2 of those directly impact students. We need to have a conversation about if any of them fit within our asset priorities. In the interest of the organization, not just shutting down randomly, this is like why we're doing this and kind of giving them a floater year for fiscal year 21. But I'm gonna come back with another bill with recommendations about kind of what to do next. So when this bill comes up, I might have to leave a little early before it comes up. I want to cut the last enacted clause. And the last enacted clause is basically saying that going forward, like for next year, we're gonna increase our asset budget by that 48 plus a 2% as we would normally do. I'm gonna talk more to Finance Committee and YWCA and the asset admin team about what should happen there. Probably the recommendation will not be to just increase it by this 48,000. We're probably gonna go back through like their scorecard and their various programs and come with a more refined recommendation about how to move forward. So I really wanna treat this as 2 problems. This first problem, that they need money for fiscal year 21, and this 48,000, moving that 48,000 is the way to do it. And then the second problem is gonna be what do we do after fiscal year 21? And that will be a separate bill. So does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry, that's a lot. I tried to parse it down as much as possible.
Questions for Treasurer Doherty?
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Bye.
Thank you, Treasurer Doherty. Anyone else wishing to speak on the open forum can approach the lectern. Seeing none, we go ahead and move into adopting tonight's agenda. Are there any changes or additions to tonight's agenda? Senator Class.
I move to postpone indefinitely 2019-3-003F, Atheist and Agnostic Society, or funding Atheist and Agnostic Society. Oh, we got a mic switch.
There's been a motion to move to strike 2019-3-3F, funding Atheist and Agnostic Society from the agenda, and there's been a second. Are there any objections?
It's a motion to postpone indefinitely.
Oh, the motion, sorry, I take it back. There's been a motion to postpone 2019-3-3F, funding Atheist and Agnostic Society indefinitely, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Thank you. I was looking for that word and then it just blacked out. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the bill has been postponed indefinitely. Senator Class.
I move to table indefinitely 2019-3-009F, funding ski and Iowa State Ski and Snowboard Club.
There's been a motion to table 2019-3-009F, funding Iowa State Ski and Snowboard Club indefinitely, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the bill has been tabled indefinitely.
I yield.
Senator Ludwig.
Yeah, I move to phone indefinitely 2019-3-006.
There's been a motion to postpone 2019-3-006 SO, overriding the veto of PNC, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? There's been an objection. Yeah. We move into to withdraw. Any further objections? Seeing none, the bill, did you say postpone? The bill has been postponed indefinitely. Senator Ludwig, you still have the floor. Senator Hanyang.
I move to add 2019-3-016F, adopting fiscal year 2021 priorities and criteria to the top of new business.
There's been a motion to add 2019-3-16F, adopting 2020, is it 2021, right? 2021 fiscal year PNC, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? And that's the top new business. Seeing none, the bill has been added to the agenda. Senator Hanyang, you still have the floor. Further changes or additions to tonight's agenda? There's been a motion to move to adopt tonight's agenda. There's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the agenda has been adopted. Moving down to approval of last week's meeting minutes. Are there any changes to last week's meeting minutes? There's been a motion to move to adopt last week's minutes, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the minutes stands approved. Moving down to committee reports, standing off with the rules with Madam Speaker.
Okay, hi everyone. So we went back and looked at the speeding up the quorum process bill. Turns out it was fine, exactly the way it was the first time. So it's back. We're not messing with the wording this time. It should be good. And then, so we sent that to Senate favorably, and we also sent the other bylaw bill to Senate favorably. Yeah, that's about it.
Questions for Madam Speaker? Seeing none, we move down to Finance Committee with our beautiful Senator class.
Ooh, Tony Tonette level, whoa. So as you can see, we sent Funding Ski and Snowboard Club favorably. However, they were not able to make it to the meeting tonight. Because they aren't able to make it to the meeting tonight, some things in their bill are going to change. So that's why we tabled it indefinitely, because we don't know what's going to happen. And then the other bill we sent was funding refreshments for legislative wake-up event, was sent favorably. Annuals are starting. We've had some help sessions, info sessions this week. They continue throughout the rest of the week, and then help sessions start next week. If you're in a club, tell your treasurer to come to an info session if you want money. Also, we're going to be talking about PNC again. Yeah, and I yield.
I'm glad I didn't miss that conversation. Moving on to SI with Senator Heasley.
Not beautiful, but that's okay. So nothing really new to report. We just had our first meeting this Monday, so I yield.
Thank you. For any questions? Moving on to PR Committee with Senator Hanyang.
It's okay, Senator Heasley, I'm not beautiful either. We yesterday met and talked about election events and what we kind of have for those. We have a candidate open house that we are planning at the library. There are 2 times that have been kind of set up for that, so we'll give you more details in the coming weeks. We have a couple Senate information sessions coming up. These were because some people, weren't able to make the ones, for example, like today because of classes or such like that. There will be a flyer that will be posted on Instagram pretty soon about those specific dates. So they'll be coming up on the 3rd, on the 4th, and the 6th, I believe. And then we're also looking at doing ramen handouts again for Senate candidates, because that has been pretty popular, or was pretty popular last year. Senator Meredith wants to say we're doing goldfish and fruit snacks as well. So in addition to that, we're also looking at planning a Valentine's Day event. They'll have little hearts and little phrases on why we love Iowa State, and so it's a good way for students to be able to participate in that. And those will go to the departments here, so that's all.
Questions for Senator Hanyang? Seeing none, we moved on to Diversity and Inclusion Committee with Senator Samuel.
Yeah, we didn't have a meeting this week, so nothing new to report.
Questions for Senator Samuel? Moving on to civic engagement with our beautiful Senator Tonette. Paul.
Yep, that's right. All right, so civic engagement has finally ironed out a meeting time, so we're going to be meeting tomorrow. I guess I should have one more quick reminder for everyone. Caucuses are coming up. I'm sure you haven't heard about it already, but they're coming up. They're on Monday. Doors open at 6:30 at your caucus location. If you're not in line by 7, you probably won't be able to enter. So try and get there early so you don't get kind of kicked out if you're trying to caucus. And then also, we're going to see the bill for the legislative wake-up event later. I kind of talked about it quite a bit last week, but this is a really cool event. I'm excited to hear what you all think about it. Yeah.
Questions for Senator Trinidad? Seeing none, we moved on to comments from the executive branch with President Graber.
Hello, everyone. First off, shout out to everyone who read my email. Senator Khan has a great joke. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you didn't read my email. Moving on, cabinet update. So we had our cabinet meeting on Monday, and we talked about the upcoming events such as a lifestyle expo, which will take place from 11 to 2 p.m. And then we also have the human trafficking information session, which also takes place tomorrow from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. in the Gold Room of the MU. The Lifestyle Expo is from 11 to 2 p.m. At the State Gym. I didn't specify before that. In addition, we talked about the U.S. diversity requirement, the All University Sustainability Committee, and then the first year council updates. And we also discussed the City Council's 10 goals, which you can email Devin Leeson about, and he'll send that out as well. But shout out to him for working hard on that. In addition, Chief of Staff Kuzel was working with the president of STARS to work on getting the new Jack Trice statue on the tour route. So we worked to that, but they already put it on there. So we're really happy about that. It'll be on the Campanile stop, so if you are ever on the tour, you'll hear it then. So that's really exciting to hear about that, because that was actually one of our campaign platform points, so we're happy to put that on. In addition, there's a veto, so I did that. If you didn't read my statement, please do so. It's also in the email with all the reasonings on that as well. And then GPSS just passed the same joint resolution that we passed in terms of the prep week. I also got word that the executive, there's a faculty senate committee.
Not a lot of faculty senate committee. So it passed through there's 4 stages a bill has to go through until it gets to the actual faculty senate. So it's made it through 2 of them. Go to their executive committee, and then it will be voted on in faculty senate. I'm guessing probably at their meeting next month.
That's really exciting. So shout out to Senator Alucard for writing that, and the co-sponsors as well. And then we had a meeting with President Winterstein on our meeting on Monday. We talked about the special student fee recommendations that we made. We discussed the University Sustainability Committee, and then we talked about Heroes Week. And for Diversity and Inclusion Committee, she actually suggested possibly, with the naming of Simon Estes Music Hall, possibly doing that in conjunction with Heroes Week, so you could celebrate that as well, just depending on the timing. And then Simon Estes Music Hall will be officially approved on February 4th/5th is when the Board of Regents meeting is. They'll approve it then, so we're really excited about that. So yeah, are there any questions about anything?
Questions for President Graber?
Oh, and then Shabam actually also has an announcement. Shabam, what's your big announcement?
Grammarly Premium is now available for all students for free. Please let everyone know, and yeah.
Yeah, so I went to Public Relations Committee yesterday, and they're also going to try to push the Grammarly information out to the English departments and advisors as well. If you want to let your deans know that this is available as well, and then send them the link to how we can do it, they can spread the information, and all students will be able to benefit from that. So thank you for that.
Questions for President Graber? Seeing none, we move down to external matters. Within external matters, general orders. The first bill will be 2019-3-12F, funding asset account for YWCA with Senator Class.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right. Huh. Cool. Well, just to start off, I'm going to move to amend the bill by striking the last enacted clause and then also fixing the grammar that would happen in the clause above that.
There's been a amendment proposed to strike the last enacted clause. correct, Senator Class?
Yes.
And there's been a second. We move into discussion. Senator Class.
So this is what Treasurer Doherty was just talking about. This separates it into kind of two problems, not two problems, but two solutions to the one problem. We do this now, and then we kind of have more discussion and some more information to look to what we're going to do in the future. This helps us, it helps Treasurer Doherty, it helps Finance Committee, it helps the Asset Board, and that's why I'm doing this. I yield.
There's been a call to question on the primary amendment, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a placard vote, and there's been a call for unanimous consent. Are there any objections in approving the primary amendment by the way of unanimous consent? Seeing none, the amendment stands approved. Senator Class.
Yeah, Treasurer Doherty explained this a lot. If you have questions, I would direct them towards her. She's still here, thankfully. But I think she's done a lot of work on this, and there's been a lot of time with the Asset Board. So I'm going to call the question.
There's been a call to question on the asset bill, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a roll call vote. Senator Advet. Bender. Blair. Khan. Crabb. Culbertson. Dollinger. Fritz. Green. Gonzalez. Hanyang. Heasley. Class. Klein. Ludwig. Mass. Meredith. Mitchell. Orger. Renchi. Schrader. Searles. Stanley. Samuel. Tonet. Zastro. Bender. Heasley. With a vote of 24 to 0 to 2, this funding asset account passes. Moving on to general orders. 2019-3-3Y, speeding up the quorum process with Vice Speaker Schrader.
I'll yield so Senator Mass can make the Rules Committee amendment.
Senator Mass.
Sure. I move that the Senate revoke any previous amendments and return to the
There's been. Could you explain them?
Yeah, so to clarify, the Rules Committee, after we dug ourselves into a little bit of a hole last week with a couple amendments and got very confused very quickly, the Rules Committee felt that the current language is satisfactory and consistent with other bylaws, including the other ones that describe how motions work. So the other amendments just confuse the process even more, and returning the bill to its original language would meet the original intent of the bill.
Thank you. There's been a motion. Oh, so this is with the amendment?
Yeah.
Okay. But are these the ones that are highlighted changes, or just like everything just back normal? Okay. Senator Mass, so Senator Mass has proposed an amendment to move to the original bill, and there's been a second. We'll move into discussion. Senator Mass.
Question.
There's been a call to question on the amendment, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a placard vote.
You see.
And there's been a call for unanimous consent. Are there any objections in approving the primary amendment by the way of unanimous consent? Seeing none, the amendment stands approved. Senator Mass.
Yeah, I like this bill. I think we debated the merits of this bill last week, and I think there's a lot of general approval. So with that, I will call for the question on this bill.
There's been a call to question on the bill as a whole, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a roll call vote. Senator Advet. Bender. Blair. Hahn. Crabb. Culbertson. Dollinger. Fritz. Green. Gonzalez. Hanyang. Heasley. Class. Klein. Ludwig. Mass. Meredith. Mitchell. Orger. Rinchi. Schrader. Searles. Stanley. Samuel. Tonet. Zastro. Blair. Sorry, Bender. Heasley. 24 to 0 to 2. For the vote of 24 to 0 to 2, this bylaw change the bill passes. Moving on to 2019-3-11F, funding refreshments for a legislative wake-up event with Senator Tonet.
That is not the bill. That's not the bill. Where is it? It's fine. Okay, here is the bill. So first of all, I will propose the amendments from the Finance Committee.
Point of information, I was never sent the amendments from Finance Committee for this
Okay,
bill.
well, I will move to amend the bill per the Finance Committee.
Second.
Okay.
Would you be able to send the amendments to Vice Speaker Schrader, or if
Okay,
you know the
literally,
amendments?
it's just adding a cent to the catering service fees line item, and then updating the total. Apparently, the MU applies 22% differently than I do, so. Yeah.
There's been a motion to move to add, amend the bill and add a cent to one of the line items. And there's been a second. We move into discussion. Senator Tonet.
I know this might be a deal breaker for some of you, but it's per the quote that I got from the MU, so I hope you all will be receptive to it. And so I will call the question.
There's been a call to question on the primary amendment, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a placard vote. And there's been a call for unanimous consent. Are there any objections in approving the primary amendment by the way of unanimous consent? Seeing none, the amendment stands approved. Senator Tonet.
All right, so thanks for dealing with me through that one. So yeah, I talked about this bill last week, kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier. So legislative wake-up event is a common event held by the League of Women Voters. This one is getting lectures funding because it's on campus, but lectures funding can't be used to like pay for food, and so they reached out to us and said, hey, would you all be willing to help us out on this one? So the Civic Engagement Committee is kind of teaming up with them to help put on this event, and so we wanted to help cover some food. The event's at 8 in the morning on a Saturday, and I don't know about you all, but if there's not coffee at an event at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, I probably won't be there. So we're trying to help provide that. And I don't see any placards up, so I will call to question.
There's been a call to question on the bill as a whole, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a roll call vote. Senator Advet. Bender. Blair. Khan. Crabb. Cobbleton. Dollinger. Fritz. Green. Gonzalez. Hanyan. Heasley. Plath. Klein. Ludwig. Mass. Meredith. Mitchell. Orger. Rinchi. Schrader. Searles. Stanley. Samuel. Tonet. Zastro. Bender. Heasley. With a vote of 24 to 0 to 2, this funding request passes.
Move to strike Senator Bender from the roll.
There's been a There's been a motion to strike Senator Bender from the roll call. Are there any objections? It was, yes, there was no quorum. The call was withdrawn. I did. Any objections to that? Moving on to 2019-3-4Y, the creation of student advocates with Vice Speaker Schrader.
So this is a bill that would create a new program underneath the judicial branch of student government. It's a pretty big deal. Director of Rachel Orger and I have been working on this for a while, and we sat down with students who currently serve on student conduct hearing boards and got their opinions on what they think would be a benefit to the system. We met with the Dean of Students Office, former Dean of Students Vernon Hurt, as well as some other staff that deal with specifically with Title IX. We went to a conference where every other school that has this program was there, and we asked them a bunch of questions about their programs, what they liked about them, what they didn't like about them. So we have taken a course of like 5 months, and we went to Disney World in the middle there. It was a great time. And so if you have any questions about this, if you have any questions about the implementation or suggestions, I'm going to quick run through the program. So right now, any student at Iowa State that goes through the student conduct hearing process is allowed an advocate who can go to hearings with them or provide them advice afterwards or kind of review documents with them and provide emotional support. This is something a lot of universities don't have and is a very good thing because it makes it so students don't get into a room with a bunch of administrators and students on a panel, just trying to find it out. This way students feel like they're getting a fair run through the process. But most things that go through the student conduct process don't need a lawyer, and a lot of times I don't know anyone on campus that would know the student conduct process besides the people that I know that are on the board. I imagine most students don't know anyone that's on the board. So it's kind of just, you're in a pickle if it's not bad enough to get a lawyer, but you don't know anyone that knows the process, so it's not really helpful to have them there. Some students bring their parents in to kind of help emotional support that way. But this would provide something for students to utilize so they don't have to go out and hire a lawyer if they don't need to, and as well as make sure that they feel like they're getting a fair run through the process and they know their options as they go through it. So we would create this program. The director would be selected by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and then that director would then fill out, there's a minimum and a maximum, if I remember right, it was 4 and 9 people who are advocates, and they would go through a training process that would be similar to the training the students get through the student conduct hearing process. We have talked to the Dean of Students Office about that, and they're more than willing to help us out. They think it's a great program. We just need to make sure that everybody's trained. But Iowa State makes it great. We have a great process where there's actually a guide online already that explains it all. So we don't need to make new material. We just need to have people sit down and explain the material with students. There's even a student bill of rights in there, which is really cool if you haven't looked at it. So students will be trained, they'll understand it, and then when students get the student conduct email that they're going through the process, they'll say you're allowed an advocate. Student government provides this option or resource for students if you need an advocate. And that would link to kind of an intake form that we're going to host on the website. We talked to our IT director over there, Shubham, and we can do it. And the great thing about running it through the website is we'll have data on how many people are coming, and we'll try and keep files of them so we know how many students we're helping, what are the cases that we're seeing the most, and just to kind of make sure that the stakeholders that are involved are comfortable with student government in this role. And by keeping information about how many students are come, how many leave satisfied, we can ensure that this program isn't viewed skeptically, but it has honest and open feedback about what's the state of the program, and hopefully we can make some historical trend lines about that. So when students go through the intake form, they'll be directed an advocate who will sit down and go through their process with them. They will sign confidentiality forms because most of what they'll be talking about is protected by FERPA. So there will be confidentiality forms that the Dean of Students Office is also helping out with create. And I think they actually already created, they're sending them over. So they'll go through that, and then they will advise students throughout the process, whenever if there's evidence to review, or sometimes there's cross-examination if it gets to that far of witnesses, and they can sit in the room there too. They can't directly cross-examine, but they can give advice, and then they can be there. Just because of a lot of students, it's a really intense process, and if you break down crying in the middle of it, it's always good to have someone that's there who's on your behalf or knows your story, who you at least feel like you can trust in that process, and it's not just surrounded by a bunch of people that you might think are hostile towards you or towards your outcome. And once you get through there, either a negotiated settlement is reached, or if the conduct board decides, then the case is done. We'll close the file. We'll seal it and password protect it to ensure confidentiality, but we'll take the name details out of it to make sure we keep as much data as we can. The reason that it is in the judicial branch is because a lot of the other students that ran similar programs at different universities wanted more independence. They felt that their student government senates or executive branches were interfering in their processes, specifically when it came to Title IX cases, and they felt that as much independence as you can give something while still ensuring it's accountable is really important. So if you have any questions about what these programs look like in other schools or differences or decisions we made, please ask me, and I'd be happy to answer. Hopefully that's a not complicated or rambly run through of the whole thing. I'll yield.
Senator Fritz.
Yeah, so thank you to you and Rachel for writing this and doing that conference. That sounds like really cool. So I have two questions. The first one is, do you know what any numbers look like at other schools, rates of participation, usage?
Yeah, so it really depends on the amount of buy-in that these programs get from the universities or their student governments. So if there are some, like Mizzou, their program is just a student club, just like any other club we have. But because they don't have any, students don't really trust them, first of all, because it's not through the student government, and their university doesn't trust them because they're not through the student government. So I think they had 12 cases last year. They just don't have a lot of run-through because they're not getting referred. Georgetown and Oklahoma State, or no, Oregon State, I think had the most cases. I think they dealt with hundreds every semester. So that's kind of the range, but it really is about working with your university and not against your university, and that's what makes a program successful or not successful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's impressive that they had hundreds. So, then my second question is, it says here that committee members are not authorized or able to provide any legal advice. So does that mean that they're not liable? Like, do liability issues come into this whatsoever?
Yeah, if you're not cleared by the Bar Association of Iowa, you can't give legal advice.
Yeah, yeah.
So when we go through training, that's going to be explicitly spelled out. What's legal advice? What's not legal advice? Because that's something that, as student government, we can't have an organization full of people giving illegal legal advice, because then we're liable.
Yeah.
That would be bad.
Okay, so there'll be training to say what is legal and what is not.
Yeah, and
Okay.
if the moment someone gives illegal advice is the moment this gets shut down, either
Okay.
by us or the university. So.
Okay. They'll be well trained then. Good. I yield.
Senator Han Young.
This is a little bit more of a technical point, but Senator Schrader, you mentioned, or Vice Speaker Schrader, geez. You mentioned 4 and 9 committee members, while the bill says 2 and 6. Do you feel like the numbers that are listed are appropriate for having, coverage and then being able to relate to students specifically like different identities?
Yeah, thanks for finding it. So 2 and 6. The reason, so Rachel and I did talk about this quite a bit. We just don't know how many students are going to go through the process. So to answer, if a ton of people utilize it, then we probably need more than that. But if we don't want to have a whole committee full of people that aren't engaged, so then they quit. So, I could see this being a bylaw that needs to be adjusted in the future.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I yield.
President Gerber.
Our Speaker Schrader, question for you. Would Supreme Court justices be eligible to be student advocates?
Not if they serve, so yes, unless they're on the Student Conduct Hearing Board. You can't be on both sides of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you yield? President Graber, do you yield? Senator Fritz. There's been a call to question, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a roll call vote. Senator Advet, Bender, Blair, Khan, Crabb, Colberton, Dollinger, Fritz, Green, Gonzalez, Hanyoung, Class, Klein, Peasley, Ludwig, Mass, Meredith, Mitchell, Orger, Renchi, Schrader, Searles, Stanley, Samuel, Toinette, Zastro. 26. With a vote of 26 to 0 to 0, the creation of student advocate bill passes. Moving on to new business. What's up, Senator Class?
I need to take the ski club bill from the table. Can
There-
we do that now?
Yeah, it has to be, well, you have to propose
be
a
with-
motion, and then
I move to take from the table 2019-3-009F, funding Iowa State Ski and Snowboard Club.
there's been a motion to pick up 2019-3-009F, funding Iowa State Ski and Snowboarding Club. And there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a placard vote. There's been a call for unanimous consent. Are there any objections in picking up 2019-3-9F from the table? Seeing none, the bill has been picked up. Moving on, the bill 2019-3-9F. Is it Senator Bender?
I move to accept Finance Committee's amendments.
Point of information, what are those amendments? I don't have them.
Do you have the updated amendments?
There's been an amendment proposed by Senator Bender to amend the bill.
Second.
And there's been a second. We move into discussion. Senator Bender.
They're talking about something else.
Senator Class.
Okay. Oh wait, what are we Are we debating the finance? Call the question.
Second.
There's been a call to question on the amendment as a whole. And there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a placard vote. And there's been a call for unanimous consent. Are there any objections in approving the primary amendment by the way of unanimous consent? Seeing none, the amendment stands approved. Senator Class.
I move to amend the quantities of both to 10.
There's
and
been
then
a
also the subsequent changes. No, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
There's been a motion to amend there's been amendment that has been proposed to amend the bill that is reflected on the screen. There's been a second. We move into discussion. Senator.
Okay. I'll also need the cost, and now the cost stays the same. The total then goes to $1,200 for both. Well, this is just kind of goes with the changing of the quantity.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be 600 each. Okay, now I call the question.
There's been a call to question on the amendment, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a placard vote, and there's been a call for unanimous consent. Are there any objections in approving the primary amendment by the way of unanimous consent? Seeing none, the amendment stands approved. Senator Class.
I move to waive, okay, so this organization has, this event is this weekend, there was some miscommunication, and someone is also on a conference who put this funding request in, and so they had to send an alternative representative to Finance Committee yesterday, and then something was, they were misinformed and we're not here tonight. That's why we tabled it earlier, and now we brought it back because it's this weekend. So, with all of that said, I move to waive the bylaw 11.2.3, which states any student organization requesting funding through student government accounts must send a representative to Senate from the relevant organization at the time of the funding request for this bill.
Point of order, the bylaws are only allowed to be waived if they're in chapter 4 or 5, according to the bylaw bill we passed.
Oh, that's a, okay, interesting.
That's not correct, to my knowledge. The last time I read that bill, that's not correct. You want, Senator Stanley, what do you have?
Yeah, I have the relevant bylaw in front of me right now. It's 4.12.11.1. This motion shall be in order only for bylaws having to do with the operating procedure of the Senate or Senate committees, parentheses, chapters 4 and 5. That is directly describing the incidental motion to waive a bylaw, which is the bylaw that Senator Klass just attempted to leverage. I yield.
Senator Zastro, what do you have? I would not take that. If you want to overrule it, go ahead, but I would not take that into consideration.
For clarification, so are you, I assume that you mean you're trying to waive that bylaw is not in chapter 4 or 5 and overrule that decision, meaning that we could waive the bylaw by just pretending it's in chapter 4 or 5?
I'm moving to waive the bylaw that's in chapter 4, saying you can't waive bylaws outside of chapter 4 or 5.
Too much laws.
To recess for 10 minutes to get this
Would-
figured out.
Would you withdraw first, since you already proposed? Would you be able to withdraw so that we can recess for 5 minutes?
Withdrawn.
Thank you.
For 5 minutes.
There's been a motion to recess for 5 minutes, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we have been recessed. Vice Speaker Schrader, would you want to move to the speaker chair? All people are moving. A quick, Senator Class.
So, we have a representative of the Ski and Snowboard Club, guys. So, I'm going to yield to Treasurer Doherty. Is that how I'm supposed to yield to? Okay, cool.
Hi, okay, so please just direct any questions to me real quick. Our representative here is a little fresh to the situation. So basically what's happening is that they're going to Chestnut this weekend. The reason that there's 2 conference registrations is because there's basically like 2 events. They kind of described it to us as like a normal event and then like a regionals event. So that's why there's 2 different categories. It is technically like the same 10 people who are going in both, but there's 2 different registration categories. We do this a lot. We did it for skydivers. And then the reason it went from 1 to 10, there was just a little miscommunication with the person who attended last night. She thought 21 people were going to Chestnut. We got off the phone with the captain, who's currently in Atlanta, that actually 30 people are going this weekend. So that's why it moved up. If you guys have any questions, that's fine. This is a pretty average sports club, had more people join than they expected during their annuals process. Yield.
Questions for? I would wait on that. I'm not going to take that. I want the bill up on the screen so that senators can have it, take a look. Speaker Colberton.
Senator Searles, do you just want to tell us kind of about your time involved with the organization? Just kind of speak to that.
I've been skiing with them for about a minute. No. So I actually am, it's probably not the answer you're expecting, but I am good friends with Ryan, who's the president, and him and I have skied and snowboarded in the past together many times. He is really good, and as part of this club has gotten, I believe it was 3rd nationally 2 years ago in some competitions. It's a really awesome club, and they actually have their office right in West Sauce, right near us. And if you want to learn more about it, I think they're like right next to the executive office. They're all really awesome people. So.
Senator Green.
So I've never skied or snowboarded, so which one is better and why do you think that?
So I'm a little biased. I was a ski instructor for about 5 years. I can ski and snowboard. Ryan, who's the president, is a snowboarder. We often swap. In my opinion, it is easier to learn how to get the basics of skiing, but it can be a lot harder to get into the advanced levels of skiing. Snowboarding, I've always struggled getting into the basics, and then I've never gotten advanced, so I can't speak to that level. But if you're looking for a ski instructor, I know how to teach.
Cool, and then another question, how old were you the first time that you did this?
I think I was 13. But I taught, my youngest, what are they called? Student. Wow, that's what we are. My youngest student was 2 years old.
Oh, cute. That's super cute, and I yield.
Vice Speaker Schrader.
Okay, I have emailed the bill to you all. It is the same as what was on the screen. So it's Chestnut Club Tournament registration and Chestnut Divisional Tournament registration. We're paying $600 each for that. So I know the lister takes a little bit to work through, but so it's a $1,200 total request for those 2 things. And you should have the bill in your inboxes soon. Sooner if you're towards the top of the alphabet, because that's how it works.
Thank you. There's been a call to question. And is there a second? There's been a second. Are there any objections to calling the question?
Point of information, can I vote? Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. Moving to a roll call vote. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my papers. Senator Advet. Bender. Blair. Khan. Crabb. Colbertson. Dollinger. Fritz. Green. Gonzalez. Hanyoung. Heasley. Class. Klein. Ludwig. Mast. Meredith. Mitchell. Orger. Rinchi. Schrader. Searles.
Abstain.
Stanley. Samuel. Tonette. Zastro. With a vote of 25 to 0 to 1, this funding request passes.
Thank you, that means a lot.
Congratulations, Searles. Moving on to new business, 2019-3-16F, with adopting fiscal year 2021 priorities and criteria with Senator Hanyoung.
Title. Move to waive second read.
There's been a... Someone has to ask a question of intent for you to waive.
Sorry,
second
I
read.
withdraw.
He cannot propose to move to second reading. Didn't know that. Thank you. There's been a motion to move to waive second read, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the second read has been waived. Senator Hanyoung.
So I'll first off by saying the intent of this. This is just so that we have the priorities and criteria passed last week, with the exception of keeping the language in the bill, or in PNC, about international and ethnic food. This was something that directly, President Graber sent out the veto about that. That's the one issue with the PNC that was passed last week. Personally, this was one thing that I'm really glad that Senator Klass said last week, because it was something that we needed to really consider. And I know everybody was tired last week, and I was in the same boat, but it was pretty clear, talking to constituents, talking to students, debating over this, internally in the past week, that we really rushed through that decision. And so I'm grateful that President Graber decided to veto that so we could have some more thought over it. And I really hope that we can look at this and, pass this the way it was. So I yield.
Senator Ludwig.
I was gonna make some amendments to sections, but I think we're still struggling to get the screen working. I guess I can talk through the amendments there to the conferences and competitive trips section. That's lines 206 through 227. So in discussions with President Graber at Rules Committee on Monday, we talked about alternative means of, pulling back exactly what we're funding. And so one of the ideas that was put forth was changing the proportion to which we fund conferences and competitive trips. And so changing it from a half to a third up to 150. And then something I talked with Vice Speaker Schrader about earlier today, and we thought might be a good idea, is limiting the total number of conferences and trips that an organization can request funding for. So while they're getting up, I guess I'll talk through it. Line 211, I believe, might be, I think I have the same numbering as you guys. I just striked half and changed it to 1/3 the cost. And then 213, I added a line at 213 that said organizations shall not receive funding for more than 4 conferences in a year. And then I basically applied the same language to the competitive trip section below. You will see those changes on the screen eventually.
Ludwig, would you want to
Withdraw?
withdraw the amendment proposal and recess for 15 minutes while illustrator so that we don't exhaust the time on the bill as a whole?
Okay, yeah, I will withdraw my amendments and then move to recess for 15 minutes.
Would work, Vice Speaker Scher? And there's been a motion to move to recess for 15 minutes. Is there a second? There's been second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we've been recessed for 15.
birthday's in June. So I could read something like at the last meeting, how I always had to do in school, with like at the end of the school year, I wanted to bring
We're back in action with our thank you so much to our IT individuals for getting that set up and for White Speaker Trader for printing out all of these. I'll take. Would you, Senator Ludwig?
All right, back at it again. This time, I'm going to propose the amendments on that are on line 210 and 223, and not the other ones.
There's been an amendment proposed. Are those the ones?
Yes.
There's been an amendment proposed that's stated up on the screen, and there's been a second. We move into discussion. Senator Ludwig.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, when we were talking with President Graber about basically the whole situation with the veto and PNC, this was something that we talked about, and it's something that Senator Klass had brought up to me before, and I'm open to hearing any discussion. I yield to President Graber.
Just to clarify on this, in Rules Committee, they asked if we had to cut somewhere other than international and ethnic food, what was I willing to give up, if that makes sense? And so, personally, I'm not in favor of this amendment, but I would rather have this amendment than the international and ethnic food, if that makes sense. And I feel like I had to pick in Rules Committee, which I feel like we don't have to pick, if that makes sense. Just wanted to clarify on that.
Do you yield? Senator Klass.
Yeah.
You yielded.
I thought I was giving my time.
No. You didn't ask a question. You yielded your time.
Okay.
Sorry. Senator Ludwig. Oh, Senator Klass, sorry.
So, and speaking with finance during the recess, this, as President Graber said, this is highly favorable compared to the international and ethnic food. One thing I would rather do is do half up to $100 so that, you know, it's not cutting a percentage, but it's just lowering the limit so the people that get a bunch would still get less. But that's an idea that we could, I'm going to ask a question. What would you like to say? I'm asking a question, not yielding my time.
Something different than what you said? Was that a response? Go ahead. Okay. So I get that there's like this fiscal responsibility argument going around. We don't have to do any of this. I don't really understand why there's this perception that PNC needs to be limited in order to ensure fiscal responsibility. The reason you guys put Finance Committee senators on Finance Committee, and the reason we spend 55 hours with each individual organization and then have a very long budget balancing session is to ensure fiscal responsibility. It is not the purpose of PNC to be limited in order to make it harder to fund organizations to ensure fiscal responsibility. Like I just don't really see the point of this. I don't see the point of either of them. You guys will still be voting on the omnibus bill. You can still pull every single budget if you disagree here or there with how much we funded various conference registrations. This will artificially hurt the smallest organizations. Yeah, we have a lot of larger organizations that go to a bunch of conferences, but I have no reason to think that that's a problem. Like the only reason we should do anything in PNC if it's been an active problem in the past. That's why Finance Committee spends fall semester every single meeting going through every single line of PNC to find problems. So I mean, obviously I disagree with this if that wasn't entirely clear, but we don't need to do either of these things, a cap or cutting it to a third. I yield.
Yeah. I agree with, I was giving a compromise, but obviously my opinion would be that Finance Committee is nominated and is voted on and appointed to do this job. We bring our recommendations to you. It's very similar to Rules Committee bringing the recommendations of bylaw rules. We don't really mess with that process. Obviously, it's completely different, but the main purpose of student government should be to fund clubs. I think making PNC more limiting is antithetical to that idea, and I do not think we should cut anywhere, but if we had to do a compromise, I don't want to, and I yield.
Senator Hanyu.
So, just theoretically, on both the third amendment and also the $100 cap, we just saw a club that, you know, if you change that to a third, they would have to raise $400 more for their conferences that, you know, is this weekend. So how are they going to do that? Also, with $100, you're going to have to also raise around $400, you know, because their registration per person was $120. So that wouldn't, that'd be $20 per that they, oh, sorry, ignore what I just said. Basically, I really feel like we need to have a lot more trust in Finance Committee. They seem very passionate about it, and we're blessed to have this sort of group of people who take the time for these sort of decisions. And like Treasurer Doherty said, if you feel like this is an improper use of funds, that's why we're here. That's why we see funding bills in Senate. So I'd be opposed to these amendments. Yield.
Senator Mass.
So I just kind of want to address a couple points of debate that I've heard. So first off, yes, we do ensure a lot of trust to Finance Committee, but ultimately Finance Committee's job is to make decisions to speed up decisions in Senate. It's not to make decisions for Senate. It's to have a couple experts look at things and make recommendations, and we decide whether or not they're good recommendations. We don't choose Finance Committee to make all the decisions for Senate. So I think that's a very big distinction to make in particular, that at the end of the day, the Senate is the body who decides where money is spent, not Finance Committee. And so we have every right to determine what the rules for how we're going to spend money are. To say that we don't trust Finance Committee enough because we're putting new things into PNC just isn't correct. We are the ones who get to decide where we spend our money. We should make the rules. That's not to say I don't trust Finance Committee or don't like Finance Committee senators at all, because they do a great job and they are able to look in details that if we as a Senate did it, would make these meetings all week long. But they're ultimately a time-saving body. They're not a body who needs to make decisions on behalf of the Senate. And that's a fundamental thing in parliamentary procedure in general, too. That's just the nature of what a committee is. Same thing with the Rules Committee. The other thing that I want to say, be hesitant about, too, is like, our single job as StuGov is not how we spend money. That's something that we're blessed and really fortunate to be able to do, is have money to spend. A lot of StuGovs exist despite not having very much money at all and not being able to give any to clubs. Where we should spend money is on what our priorities are, and those priorities are organizations that we feel help the students at Iowa State and help to give them a better, fuller experience for what they're seeking out of their university education. So I think that's an important distinction to make as well. Now back to the actual amendment. I'm not sure I'm really in favor of cutting it down to a third. I'm not completely convinced that we need to limit it very much of our spending in this particular way. I think overall we have concerns about decreasing numbers this next year, but I think too, I think there are other areas that Finance Committee has already talked about. If we were at a lack of funds, we would cut more reasonable areas of the budget. And I don't think that reducing TRIP funding is ultimately going to help us all that much. Either reduce funds, which I'm not sure we need to do this drastically, and I think it's ultimately detrimental to a lot of clubs who this is the thing that they're coming for funding. So if the motive for this is that we need to cut funding somewhere, we need to do this. I can see it, but I'm not ultimately convinced that that's actually the point that exists. I think if we're going to cut funding for this, we need to do it because we think that conferences aren't a priority for us. To me, conferences are a priority for these student organizations, so I'm currently opposed to this bill. I'll yield.
Senator Zastro.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd just like to say what Matthew said, or sorry, what Senator Klass said earlier regarding Finance Committee's opinion on this is not just the 3 Finance Committee senators in the room, but also Senator Rowling, who's the clerk on the committee, as well as Finance Director Mueller, who has been on Finance Committee since the year 2016. And they are, and also Senator Lipford as well, they are all very passionate that we do not need to further these restrictions. I appreciate the distinction they made, Senator Mass, between do we need to cut funding and should we cut it here. Regarding the question, should we cut it here, I would like to point out Finance Director Mueller mentioned that there are some clubs that go to over 20 competitions. If we drop this to a third, that is a monumental swing in price for those specific clubs. In addition, we're not discussing the cap. Right, is that correct? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, so I mean, if you think of a club like the snowboard club that we saw earlier, it's really apparent they had I believe 5 trips that they were talking about. If that gets dropped to a third funding, and we're talking about 30 students per trip, we're talking about thousands of dollars that organization now has to fundraise in a different way. That they have to, if they have to impose higher dues on their members, meaning it's harder for students to access clubs. So as far as sports clubs goes, I'm not aware if we have anybody in this body who's a member of the sports club. Well, Senator Shields, of course. But I seriously don't think we're considering just how much this specific amendment would impact. And then secondly, do we need to cut funding? This is a larger issue. President Graber started off his statement, if we had to cut somewhere, that's a big if. So if we had to cut somewhere, then I mean, sure, this might be an okay place to do it. I don't think it would be the best, but we don't need to cut anywhere. That is what the purpose of Finance Committee's discretion is. Senator Mass, you're correct in saying that Finance Committee does not ultimately make the decisions of Senate. I would also like to address the fact that if you would like to see over 200 clubs and craft their budget specifically and use your own personal discretion, then I would welcome you to apply for Finance Committee next year. But it is, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that that's your point. I'm just saying when you want to, you said that the goal for this kind of legislation is to make it so that we have general rules for better experiences for students. When you have a committee that is able to use their own discretion to examine what events that they're going to, what conferences they could be registering for that would have the most impact for both themselves, the ISU community, and their members, I think that discretion should be welcomed. I think that it's pretty clear for me, at least, how this body should vote. I hope it's clear to y'all. Yep, that's all I got. I yield.
Senator Rinchi.
Make sure you're smart with what you say. I know what you meant in that last bit when you came after Mass, but make sure you're smart. I'm kind of curious from Finance Committee, if we did make these amendments, what is the financial impact? And then so that way we know how to weigh future changes against the changes that were proposed tonight.
Senator Rinchi, would you want to address that to a particular senator from the Finance Committee or the treasurer, or, yeah?
Give it to you.
Treasurer Doherty.
If we did go through with these proposed amendments, what is the change to the budget so we can know to compare that to future changes proposed?
I can't give you exact numbers. I will say that we fund, for example, sports clubs. This would limit the funding they can get for every one of their competitions that they go to. We have, I think, like over 50 sports clubs. They go to multiple competitions a year. It would be a massive change. It would probably negatively impact every single one of those organizations. And again, this is just sports clubs. They do fundraising outside, but obviously they have a lot of members. At this university, the student government is the primary funder of student organizations on this campus, so it would be a massive impact. And then also, just for general organizations, yeah, again, I can't give you numbers, but it would be a significant impact in the budget. I'm not sure where the rest of that money would go. I guess we can fund some more inflatables for sub with the leftovers. Yeah, if that answers your question. I don't have any exact numbers, but typically how we do it is at the end, if we are over budget, we pull the largest budgets first in order to not negatively impact clubs that only get, $3,000 or $4,000. We look at the $100,000+ budgets in order to cut first, so we don't hurt organizations when we do have to make budget cuts, if that helps.
Thank you.
Senator Ludwig.
Okay, I'm withdrawing the amendment first. Explain that I only made the amendment because of the conversations that I had with Senator Klassen, the conversations I had with President Graber, neither which explained to me in any detail really any of this. So I made the amendment because they said it was a viable alternative, so I'd like to put that out there. I've been trying to withdraw since I lost my speaking privilege, so I'm sorry that I guess subjected you all to a 10-minute lecture on all that. I wouldn't have made the amendment had I known any of what was said, had anyone explained to me. People just told me they didn't like it. I didn't know why. And so, yeah, I guess I'm sorry, so I yield.
The amendment has been, you said you withdraw the amendment. The amendment has been withdrawn. We move back to the bill as a whole. Senator Ludwig, you still have the floor. Discussion on the Vice Speaker. Do you withdraw? Vice Speaker Schroeder.
The idea that that budget cuts won't have to be made is ridiculous. I've spent the last month staring at SciRide spreadsheets when we're only 45% funded by student fees, wondering how the hell we're going to pay for that. We can't even afford to keep service level, and we just got a $20 a year fee increase. We've burned through $600,000 of a trust fund in the last 2 years because of declining enrollment. There will be cuts. Whether it's now or whether it's later, there's going to be cuts. And cuts hurt clubs. I'm aware, but we don't have the money. Someone will not get everything they used to get. That's the fact. If you would like to change that, get some more of your friends to sign up to go to school here. Because enrollment is what determines our revenue. So I guess we can kick the can down the road into bureaucracy and let Finance Committee figure it out, and they'll cut a couple there and here and there, but it's going to be a lot. It's going to be about 10%, 11%. Or we can man up, and we can do it now while we're responsible to our constituents. Someone's going to need to make cuts, and we ought to provide clubs clarity of where those cuts are going to come from. So they don't submit their budget, and it comes back, and they didn't get everything they wanted, and they don't know why, because the rules say this. Oh, and the group of senators that was supposed to be here and responsibly and debate it and figure out what the rules are so we could fund everything just decided that we'll kick the can down the road into a room where they're not going to be. So I'm not going to make any amendments because I honestly doubt any cut will pass based off the conversations that I've heard in the last week. But I will be voting no because this is ridiculous. We ought to be responsible to our constituents. We can't just sit here and, well, I don't want to cut this because it would hurt that club, or cutting this would hurt that club, or somebody. There's not enough money to fund all of this. And I'm honestly confused about why it's okay to just fund it all in annuals when where the cuts are coming from are hidden. Or no, we could pull all 200 budgets ourselves. Come on. This is the rules we fund things by. And we ought to give clubs clarity about what that funding is going to look like. I yield.
Senator Zastrow.
Vice Speaker Schrader, I don't think any of us believe that there won't be cuts. I think that just so far my impression of the body as a whole is that they trust Finance Committee. If you would like to come to those budget balancing sessions, I mean, I guess I don't know that they're open door, but I assume that your company would be welcomed, and that applies to everybody. Also, President Graber's waving his mic around. I'll yield my time to him.
Yeah, so in no way is there zero clarity when we cut from a certain club, right? So I talked in my veto statement about when we go to make those cuts, we go to the big budgets like Sub and Winterfest After Dark, and we asked them, this year we're going to have to make cuts. What from your budget are you okay with us cutting? And this is something we might be cutting. And then if we have to go back and then we end up cutting that, we let them know and we say, hey, we cut this. And then they have the opportunity to come back and respond and say, hey, we disagree with this cuts. This is why we want to respond to that. So in no way are we leaving clubs in the dark. In no way are we not being clear with what we're doing at all. We let them know what we're cutting. We give them the option to let us know what they want us to cut, and then we make the responsible choice in that. I would invite you all to sit through at least one annual hearing so you understand the process, because it's really fun and it's a great experience as well. I yield.
Senator Class, do you still wish to speak?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what Senator Zastro said, and also would like to address that. I mean, I think a lot of you heard us during the recess explaining the annuals process, and if there were questions about the annual process before making amendments, I would have gladly entertained them. That also is a responsibility of us as finance senators to explain it, and maybe we should have gone through it at the start. I understand that, and so I do apologize if there was misunderstandings before amendments were made. Also, to discuss the fact, I don't think we are naive or idealistic as finance committee from what I know and from the conversations we've had this entire year about making cuts. We are following PNC, and there are big budgets that we ask at the end, as President Graber said, about where can we cut that has the least impact, and that's what we want to do. Putting arbitrary rules, not arbitrary rules, but putting these rules in writing at the beginning of cutting a percentage or making a cap or cutting sections of things, that's leaving clubs more in the dark than anything, I think, because we are still giving them the chance. We are helping clubs, and yeah, maybe it isn't the sole purpose of this body to fund clubs, as Senator Mass said earlier, but it is a large purpose, and that's what we are given the activity fee money to do. This probably wasn't worth me saying because clearly it's been echoed by other people, but I felt a responsibility to say something, I guess, being a finance senator and being more or less called out earlier. I'm going to vote yes for this because I trust us. And you know what? If it comes to the balanced budgeting session and we have to go past the 4-hour window that we have because we might have made mistakes earlier, and if we want to come to Senate and pull out all 200 budgets and we want to look through all of it again, I gladly welcome it. I yield.
Senator Stanley.
I'd like to open by saying I don't think that this should be a forum about whether or not we trust Finance Committee. Frankly, I resent the implication that Senate's attempt to enforce some cuts on this bill is our indication of a mistrust of Finance Committee. That doesn't make any sense. As a member of Rules Committee, I can tell you that if somebody wanted to amend, one of you wanted to amend one of my bylaw bills, I would be totally fine with it as long as you'd done your research and as long as it had been a carefully well-articulated point. Now, you may dispute about whether these cuts are careful or well-articulated, but I think that's beside the point I'm trying to make here. I think it's funny that people are talking about student fee dollars without considering the larger context of the student fee as well. If you might remember, I'm your representative on the student fee committee. And this year, in contrast to last year, it's become very clear that we're going to be in trouble pretty soon. Yeah, all of the budgets that we were given from each organization that came to request student fees from us, it was a sharp contrast from last year, I'll tell you that. Last year, no one wanted any more money. Everyone said, no, we're good. You know, things are looking up, except for Cyride. Thanks, Vice Speaker Schroeder. But this year, we had a lot more requests for an increase because enrollment is taking a sharp downturn, as you have heard. This is going to catch up with us sooner rather than later. And I would rather deal with it now, where we have a little bit of a cushion to deal with it, than leave it to some of our successors down the line who are forced their backs to the wall and have to make some kind of drastic slice somewhere just to keep themselves afloat. I think it's our duty to them to be resolute about what we do here. In the absence of any amendment of my own to pass, I will move to propose Senator Ludwig's amendment once again. Oh, wait, I can't do that, can I? Well, no, I can't because he withdrew it. So I'll move to propose that amendment again, and I fully expect that there will be an objection to its consideration. And if you would like to hear an amendment, if you would like to entertain the possibility of this body making a cut to the requirements here, if you would like to entertain the idea of us as a Senate enforcing our prerogative to alter this bill and to tell clubs what we think can and cannot be funded, I would encourage you to vote for the consideration of this amendment, just to hear the question, just so we can debate on its merits. With that, I'll yield. And make the motion.
There's been an amendment proposed to that has been reflected on the screen, and there's been a second. We move into discussion. Senator Stanley.
Wow, no objections to its consideration. What?
It doesn't really matter since I would rather suggest is we move into the amendment, discuss the amendment, and if you object against the amendment, you can either put your point forward or vote against the amendment. Senator Stanley.
All right, well, as far as cuts go, we've debated this. Do I like the idea of cutting conference registration? No. Do I like the idea of cutting food? Certainly not. And I like that substantially less than I like the idea of cutting conferences. Of course, and I'll relate this to my own experiences here. I am a member of a few clubs here at Iowa State. In every instance, I can think of that they would have benefited from an allotment for some kind of food, an ethnic event of some sort. In only one instance in my entire 3 years over the 3 clubs I'm a part of, can I think of a group that would have benefited from a conference registration. Now, I understand that the majority of the requests, the majority of the requests I've seen in my time here in Senate for special allocations have been for conferences. Take that as you will. But I think that in the grand scheme of things, when you set these two evils against each other, this one is the lesser. And if there is an even lesser evil that someone has to propose, perhaps, as another amendment, I would certainly be much more open to hearing that. With that, I'll yield.
Senator Klein.
So I apologize if I'm not clear at any point. My thing's been up for a while, and I have a lot of different thoughts rolling around. Real quick, I have a question for Treasurer Doherty. The balanced budgeting that the Finance Committee does, can you give me like the briefest overview of what that entails, just so that it's on the floor for, what goes into that?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to defer to President Graber. He was on the Finance Committee for a few years, and they had longer budget balancing sessions than I did last year. But yeah, I can give a brief overview.
Yep, so what we do is like I said before, when we go through the hearings, we'll mark things that we feel like maybe at the end we might have to cut. And then when we go through everything by PNC, and then we see there's a certain amount we have to cut, we then go back into those things that we marked, and then we'll then cut them, notify the organization that we cut them, and then let them know if they want to rebuttal or contest the cut, if that makes sense.
And this is done after all allocations for the following year, so that, based on predictions of the money that we'll need in the following year against the money that we have at the end of allocations. I don't know if that was a clear,
Yeah, so we won't know exactly how much student fee money we have, but Finance Director Mueller is currently in the process of figuring that out. You can talk to admissions and also figure out, based on like the student fee, it's a whole percentage breakdown of like how much we get versus like if they're, for example, a graduate student, how much of their percentage we get. So it's a pretty good estimate of how much money we'll have. So we know kind of like the total ask if we were to fully fund all clubs versus the money that we will very likely have. Obviously, it's not 100% certain, but it's been pretty close the last few years.
Awesome, thank you. Something Senator Stanley said in one of his last comments was we need to enforce, and I apologize for a misquote, we need to use our privilege as Senate to amend this and tell clubs what we think can and cannot be funded. That's massacred. Actually, a question to Senator Stanley, was that the point that you were trying to get across, to tell clubs what we can and cannot fund?
Well, I think you noted I said that we need to do that.
Mhm.
I simply said that it was our prerogative to do so.
Okay.
And if we felt the need to enforce that we should absolutely not be afraid to do so.
All right. So the point that I'm getting at here is putting this restriction into PNC, to me, limits our ability as the Senate to tell clubs what we can and cannot fund. If we put a overreaching restriction on the money that we can give for the purposes that we give it, we limit our ability as the Senate to view clubs and requests on a case-by-case basis. I think that we, as the Senate, this current Senate, have the unique opportunity to look back at the Excellence Fund debacle, and which I'm kind of shocked that this hasn't been brought up yet. I didn't think that I would get to, but we have the experience of putting a limitation on our funding and then immediately afterwards going, oh man, I wish we would have left this up to our discretion. I wish we would have left ourselves more room to function on a case-by-case basis. And I think that putting something like this in here is almost a direct echo of what we did then. This is a lesser point, but last semester a bill came up to waive the restriction on UC for funding bills, and the argument made against it that stuck out in my mind was this is student money given to student clubs, and we owe it to the clubs as the body that dictates what we do with this money to give each request its ample consideration. I think that this would limit our ability to do so. I think that I won't say the word trust because it's been kind of sullied at this point in the session, but I think that we should let the Finance Committee do what we have them here to do and make
30 seconds.
Oh, yeah. And make the recommendations that they will make, and with that I yield.
Senator Zastrow.
I would just like to respond to Senator Stanley's comment, referring to the fact that Senate mistrusts Finance Committee. I think that is inaccurate, and I don't think that that was the implication that anyone was trying to make. The reason that I believe that Finance Committee should be handling issues in cutting budgets in general instead of the Senate making these specific rules is the exact problem of bureaucracy that you were arguing against. The problem with bureaucracy is when we make broad rules that apply to a wide variety of situations in just broad strokes. What Finance Committee has the ability to do is use their discretion to be able to look at every individual situation, and in that way, discretion is a good thing. I appreciate the comment that Senator Klein made, referring to the true fact that we're not always perfect. There are times when cutting the budgets is going to be difficult, and I don't think anybody's denying that. I think that if we make broad rules forcing the discretionary process to operate within specific limitations, I think we're doing a disservice to the people who we're supposed to be serving. I think that we should have the opportunity to examine all the budgets that we are presented, and I think that we should be able to look at them, all of them as a whole, and cut back where we need to, where we have to. We are going to balance the budget as Finance Committee. We're not going to spend money that we don't have. Cuts are going to be made, and it's better if we make those with discretion where we can look at the budgets of every individual clubs instead of creating broad rules that are going to apply to many, many different situations differently. I yield.
Just on a personal note, I would suggest from hearing the conversations currently, the Senate is deviating towards what we are discussing right now. It is the amendment to discuss whether we should cut it from the half to 1/3, not that a whole discussion of Finance Committee. So please keep that into consideration. If I find a senator doing that, I will most likely call it out. Senator Rinchi. Senator Class. Speaker Culbertson.
Okay, so we've heard a lot tonight, obviously. I think the one thing that still kind of got me caught up, and this is a small thing as to why I'm considering cutting it down to 1/3, is honestly just Finance Director Mueller's reaction to, this is not me calling her out, just her reaction to when she found out that we were going to have like 10 to 11% less like funds. I guess like seeing that, I was honestly just like worried for like her and Finance Committee to have to try to deal with that. So that's kind of, I guess, why I'm considering dealing with the 1/3 cut, is because it's a lot, and I know Finance has their process and all of that. But again, I guess like Vice Speaker Schrader said, we'll have to make cuts, and if we can do that here to alleviate a little bit of Finance's stress, then I wouldn't necessarily mind that. So I'll yield.
Senator Class.
Yeah, so about this directly, as I brought up earlier, what I would rather do is to leave it at the half and then put the cap down to $100 per individual per conference. That's just so that it basically, it might not be as large of a budgetary cut that people want. However, it doesn't affect the smaller organizations as much. This is not my amendment, but that is what I would wish to happen if this amendment does happen to fail. I yield.
Senator Rinchi.
I propose to amend the amendment by striking the 1/3, returning it to 1/2, and then striking the $150 per individual.
I would rather consider you vote on this amendment and then propose another one, technically, because I would not consider this a secondary amendment because it's not part of like the primary amendment as a whole.
Okay.
Because technically what you're trying to do is you're just striking the first amendment and then going on another amendment. So I'd rather just go with the procedure.
And I don't.
To yield. There's been a call to question on the amendment as a whole, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a placard vote. Senators for this amendment, which means that they wish to change the half to 1/3, can raise their placard now. Senators against. Abstentions? Seeing none, the amendment fails. Senator Stanley, you still have the floor.
All right. Well, I will move to make that other amendment that was proposed to strike out 150 and replace it with 100.
There's been an amendment proposed to change the amount from $150 to $100, and there's been a second. We move into discussion. Senator Stanley.
It sounds good to me. I see no other. All right, I'll yield.
Senator Han Young.
This is a question anybody from Finance Committee you could answer. Treasurer Doherty, possibly. What's the largest amount of a registration fee that you've seen in annuals? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
I honestly have no idea. I mean, in the past 2 years, like, again, it's capped at 150 because there are, I feel like there was maybe one at like 500 one time for a super specialized competition. I wouldn't be surprised. skydivers, yeah, like it's really expensive to go jump out of a plane. So like, yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I yield.
Senator Rinchi.
I like something that Senator Zastro said earlier, and it's that we should be careful about putting overreaching, broad rules on things. And I think this amendment is a little distinguished from that in that this doesn't limit what we can fund, it's limiting how much we can continue to fund something that we have funded in the past. So I think there's a little difference in that, and it can be a start to a long chain where we can begin to see some cuts. And cuts mean a lot to a lot of people in my college, as we've watched the people in the agricultural industry in the United States lose 60% of their income over the last 7 years. So I put this out here with a bit of a heavy heart. I yield.
Senator Zastro.
Yeah, I mean, this is just me making the same point over and over again, but I'll talk about how it applies to this amendment specifically. Finance Committee has the ability to use their own discretion when deciding between 100 versus 150. If we have to cut clubs that have lots of other ways of advertising, for example, like a publication, they'd be able to make money in other ways that, for example, a new club wouldn't be able to. So if a new club wanted to connect to a national branch, to go to a conference, to be able to network, to grow their club, to get resources, we would be able to use our discretion more if we were able to fund them fully, whereas we'd be able to use our discretion less if there was a hard cap. I'm going to vote no on this amendment. There's another placard up, so I won't call, but call the question.
There's been a call to question on the primary amendment. There's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a placard vote. Senators for this amendment, please raise their placards now. Senators against? Abstentions? 13 to 13. Because it's 13 to 13. My word is to change it from $150 to $100, and that amendment passes. Moving on to Senator Stanley.
I yield.
Next up was Senator Klein on the list. We're back to the bill as a whole. If you wish to speak, okay. Senator Class.
Oh. I was going to call the question. Okay, call the question.
There's been a call to question on the priorities and criteria as a whole, and there's been a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll move into a roll call vote. Senator Advet. Senator Bender. Blair. Khan. Crabb. Colbertson. Dollinger. Fritz. Green. Gonzalez. Hanyang. Heasley. Class. Klein. Ludwig. Mass. Meredith. Mitchell. Orger. Schrader. Searles. Stanley. Samuel. Tonette. Zastro. Advet.
2/3 of seated senators. That's what I. So it was 21. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's, well, give me 10 seconds. With a vote of 21 to 5 to 0, this priorities and criteria passes. Moving on to new business 2019-3-13F, funding Iowa State National Society of Minorities in Hospitality. And that is Senator Bender.
Title. See it at finance.
Questions of intent? Seeing none, we'll see this one next week. Moving on to 2019-3-14F, funding Asian Student Union with Senator Bender.
Title. Yeah, see it at finance, I guess.
Questions of intent? Seeing none, we'll see this one next week. Moving on, 2019-3-15F, funding rechargeable batteries for Senate Stream with Senator Han Young.
Title. Yeah, so this basically eliminates a lot of the waste we would make from changing batteries every Senate session. You can talk to me about it later.
Questions of intent? Seeing none, we'll see this one next week. Closing announcements. Senator Searles.
So, some of you may know, some of you might not. This might seem pretty broad-reaching and maybe kind of sad. Monday, 2 days ago, was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Some of you might know, jestem Polakiem. I come from a Polish family that fled Warsaw before World War II. The reason I bring this up is we continue to see some conversations on campus. We continue to see swastikas on campus and hear about events and impact from the swastikas. And we kind of talk about how close to home it is for some people and whether the chalking policy will allow students to feel safe. To address that, no, the chalking policy will not allow students to feel safe. Banning chalking will not allow students to feel safe on this campus. I'd also like to remind us that we are a financial arm, and we do have a lot of money, but also part of our jobs here are working to make sure our students feel safe, make sure we feel safe. I am by no means hiding my identities as a cisgendered, heterosexual white male from the Midwest that grew up in a Catholic family, but I'm also growing up with the air of a Polish heritage. And seeing swastikas, to many, myself included, is really a call to death. Many of us wouldn't be here without some luck. So I'm bringing that up so that we don't forget, and we don't forget what's going on. 75 years ago seems kind of a long time, but we're still seeing that same language, same verbiage, same actions used on this campus today, and it's still happening. I mean, nothing was solved. We can still work through it, and I'm not saying nobody's doing anything, because obviously it's not like any one of us can fix everything, but just keep it in mind as we continue. We have 8 sessions left, well, 7 sessions left, and we're not gonna fix it, but we can still continue to make some efforts, continue to talk to constituencies, see what people are feeling, how people are feeling. I know people still aren't feeling safe. It's not about the policies that are gonna change it. There is a culture of hatred at Iowa State, and I think that that's no secret. People with identities much more marginalized than mine are feeling much heavier impacts. So I'm privileged in the way that I can push it aside and pretend that it's a part of history, and I think many of us are. So we have to remember that that's not possible for everyone, and it stems from the literal genocide, and that oppression still exists today. So just keep that in mind. It's been 75 years on Monday since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Yield.
Senator Stanley.
Awesome. Thanks for a great debate today, guys. I think it was quite excellent. I just wanted to pay tribute to one of, I think, my heroes and one of, I think, a lot of heroes of a lot of people here. And I'll do that by starting with a question. What do the words Mamba mentality mean to you? To some, it might just be the catchphrase of a legend and icon who was taken from us too soon on Sunday. Those words mean so much more than that, though. They encapsulate a mindset that he wanted everyone to have, you know, friends, brothers, enemies, and haters alike. The Mamba mentality is about unrelenting discipline and following the process. It's about trusting in yourself and your hard work, about hard work overcoming talent every single time. And I know the applicability of this to our mission might not be apparent at first glance, but it's still a mindset that we should all strive to instill in ourselves. Relentlessly competing and cooperating, like we just finished doing, is how we elevate our discussions into something worth presenting to our constituents. Don't make excuses. If you think you've messed up, double your efforts next time. If you feel your focus or your resolve slipping when our meetings are dragging on a little bit, just think of the people who entrusted you with a seat here, the people who expect nothing but your best here, and keep on pushing, keep on fighting. And his legacy will live on in all of you. Mamba out.
Senator Ludwig.
Howdy, howdy, everybody. Once again, back with the lectures. We've got a little bit of a gap coming up, but that doesn't mean I won't bug you over and over and over again. Tomorrow, January 30th, at 7 p.m. in the Great Hall of the Memorial Union, it's White Immunity, working through the pedagogical pitfalls of privilege with Dr. Nolan you know what? I'm just not going to try and say that. You heard the title. Yeah, no, this one's really interesting. I was kind of excited to see it. I recommend you go see it. Obviously, this Saturday, there's a legislative wake-up with Story County's Iowa legislative representatives. It's at 8:30. It's in room 3512 of the Memorial Union. Tony talks about it all the time, but it's really important to be civically engaged and to know what your legislators are up to and know what your community leaders are up to. So I really recommend you go, ask questions, figure out what they're planning to do for the session. Yeah, it's just really important. And then kind of out there, but I'm going to start bugging you now because this is also a good one. This is after that. It's on Friday, February 14th at 1 p.m. in the Great Hall here in the Memorial Union, the Women's Hour, the Great Fight to Win the Vote with Elaine Weiss. This is a part of the 100th anniversary events commemorating women's suffrage. This is one we're all really excited for on the committee. I really recommend you all go. Yeah, try and make some time. And good debate tonight. I yield.
Senator Han Young.
There are no current music concerts coming up, but like everybody, so unfortunately we'll get one of those. But like everybody said, I'm glad that we had the discussion about PNC tonight. Obviously glad that it passed in its state. Obviously compromises have to be made, cuts have to be made. I think we did debate it pretty well. I just want to go back to, at the end of the day, what do your constituents want? What do the people who you talk to outside of this room want? I talked to so many people in the past weeks from a variety of clubs, large and small, because I was guilty. I felt really guilty at the end of the night last week where I had voted for something that, upon further thought, was not who I was. And that really, like, finding out that you did something that was against your moral fiber is really, really gut-wrenching and can really haunt you. Like Senator Stanley said about the Mamba mentality, if you feel you messed up, just double down, double your efforts. So I'm really glad that we got the chance to discuss this tonight. But I think that one of the things that stuck out to me was a few conversations where students did come up to me and say, why are you deciding these things when we're not here? And even though, yes, we do have that responsibility as a body, I think it's ever more important that we're listening to their needs and that we just keep that in focus. So, Al.
Just two comments from my side. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah. I totally forgot about that, but
Thanks.
Senior Director of Academic Affairs, Moody.
Okay, y'all, I have some like exciting things I wanted to update you on, but I thought there's a lot of important stuff happening in open forum I didn't want to distract from. So one, something I've been fighting for 3 years is finally happening. We're having discussions in Faculty Senate about implementing extreme weather, not necessarily policy, but statements in like syllabi, and then in general for faculty and staff about not having to risk your life to get to campus if roads are bad. I don't know, I might be the only one pumped about it because I might be the only one that commutes, but it's very exciting. Second thing that I'd really love your feedback on, especially if you've used this resource, we're starting conversations about this course material that's been approved called Packback. It's essentially like a discussion board website that students have to pay an additional fee for, but a lot of the same things can be done on Canvas. So I'm going to be kind of advocating for getting rid of that, because why pay $25 when you already paid for Canvas? But if any of you have any like thoughts on that, or if you've used it before, please come to me, because poli-sci doesn't use technology a lot, so I don't know what it is, and I'd love to learn more about people who've used it. So yeah, that is all. Bye.
Back to my 2 comments. I'm sorry. First, please take care of yourself. People are getting sick a lot quicker than I expected. With some of the senators that are not currently present in the room, most of them are sick. I was sick out last week as well. It's in the air. So please take care of yourself. Wash your hands regularly, and please take care of yourself, as well as we only have 8 sessions left for 8. 25th is the last one, so that's 8. Yeah, I just counted. But yeah, 7 or 8. The number is just kind of just a number, but it's gonna fly by. So if you've been passionate about certain things that you really wanted to accomplish and still are in that limbo whether you should do it or not, I feel like this is the time to reach out. We are all here to help each other grow as individuals, but also grow and to do better things for the community as a whole for which we represent. So reach out. It's about time. You won't be able to know within those 7 or 8 sessions. You would be having midterms and the other things as well. So time's gonna fly by before you even know it. So please do your diligence. With that, Vice Speaker Strader.
Thanks for passing student advocates tonight. I know I told some of you coming back from the summer, but I kind of had 2 legislative goals for Senate. That was court reform and student advocates, so it's really cool to see those get done in a way that people have helped me on, and I didn't have to do it all myself, and it was really cool to be a part of. Dunking for Democracy had our game last night. Unfortunately, it was a 13-point loss, 47-60. But I would like to thank Vish and Shabam, Shabam and Travis for showing up, as well as my 2 roommates who had like 35 of our 47 points. We ran the pick and roll heavy to the 2 6'6" twins. It was a great time. But Jack Bender's joining the team, so the momentum's picking up. So get on board before we got a juggernaut, and maybe we don't need you anymore. So we're taking everybody still, but maybe not forever. Who knows? But if you know how to run the pick and roll well, we would really like you on the team. That's how you.
Or if you have the height. With that, Madam Speaker.
Okay, I'm gonna make y'all stand up with me for a sec. Get up. Up, up, up. Okay, we're gonna do like a midweek kind of like stress relief breath, okay? So in and out. Yeah, there you go. So I don't expect it to erase all your bad vibes because we're in college, but any bad vibes you maybe had from tonight or from the week so far, just let some of those out. At the end of the day, we're helping students even if we have to make some crappy calls sometimes, so just remember that. Make sure tomorrow when you wake up in the morning, you just think of a couple things you're grateful for, get back into that mindset, and try not to let, kind of crummy meetings bug you. So go Cyclones. Move to adjourn.